For a long time, the hero of this story had almost nothing going his way in life. Even this time, young Choice Ray had to talk about his problems to such a beautiful girl. The nurse remained condescending until the very end, but the guy couldn't stand her gaze. He hadn't been able to sleep well the last few nights because his body was too active. The young man hoped to find solutions from the doctor, but consulting the girl was not in his plans. He felt uneasy at the thought of being personally examined by a nurse for any irregularities. The girl was so beautiful that bad images of her kept popping into Choice's head. For this reason, he could think of nothing better to do than run away from the hospital before things got worse. This is how the hero failed to solve the problem that had been tormenting him for several nights in a row. In his dreams, Choice always seemed to have a beautiful girl talking tenderly to him. This resulted in Ray's little friend behaving disgustingly every morning. Who would have thought that by the time he reached university, the boy would have even more problems with puberty? This whole story began when Choice gave a ride to a client as a taxi driver. There was nothing remarkable about the guy, except that he forgot a nice mug in the back seat. The girl on the mug was so gorgeous that Ray couldn't return it to its rightful owner. And from then on, he suffered at night, which could already be considered punishment for the theft. At that moment, the hero had no idea why this was happening to him, but life went on as usual, so classmate Vanessa was already waiting for the guy for class. The girl always impressed Choice with her beauty, so he had trouble concentrating in class. They had long ago agreed that lyrium would help Ray pass his English exam, but until now, Choice did not understand the motives of the girl, who could have chosen any other guy. Vanessa kept coming up with more and more things that motivated the guy to study. Teaching her friend was a matter of pride for lyrium, so she did not back down from her path. The girl enjoyed spending time with a man who always remained kind and simple. It was just that recently, there had been things on Choice's mind that had nothing to do with their studies. He had to make every effort to remain serious in class, while Vanessa herself maintained a stern expression so that the student would not be distracted. It wasn't by chance that lyrium came up with the quest reward system, because it worked so well. So with each lesson, the girl became more and more like a teacher. If it weren't for her efforts, Choice would hardly have paid any attention to the English language at all. In the end, Ray was so motivated that he was practically never distracted from completing his tasks. As a result, even in the evening, the guy was still working. Despite a hard day of school, Choice could not be allowed to be expelled from university because his parents were already poor. The young man was so tired that he didn't notice how he closed his eyes and had another disturbing dream. This time, that beautiful girl demanded blood, showing off all the best parts of her body. But Ray had no intention of dying, even in his sleep, because he would be completely drained of blood. These dreams really got to him. But the guy didn't know that they were partly true. It was all about the mug, inside which the beautiful goddess Lucille had long been imprisoned. The poor girl was under an evil spell, so she couldn't get out on her own. But Choice remained deaf to her prayers, as he believed that he was only dreaming all these words. That is why Lucille continued to appear to the young man in his dreams, hoping that he would hear her. The next morning, Choice went back to the library to see Vanessa to pore over his studies. He was not bothered by the early hour, as it took many hours to learn this complex language. In this situation, the only thing that bothered Ray was Vanessa's closeness, which attracted the attention of many guys. But lyrium often pretended not to notice the general attention to her beautiful appearance. It was difficult for Choice to control his emotions in the company of such a beautiful girl, but he tried. Vanessa was like an additional challenge for Ray, distracting him with her mere presence. In fact, the girl had a good reason for helping her friend after one incident. One day, she was returning home quite late, and two unfamiliar guys of rude appearance approached her. It was at that very moment that Choice boldly stood up for his classmate. Even though they weren't in contact yet, the boy was weak in appearance since childhood and never learned to fight, but tried to settle everything peacefully. But the thugs didn't even think about just leaving, because they wanted to have a good time with the girl. Then Vanessa was overcome with righteous rage, because she was a person, not a thing. Lyrium personally scattered the insolent strangers, as she was trained in many forms of martial arts. So it was not difficult for her to deal with opponents who only knew how to talk a lot. Everything could have ended well if not for a fatal mistake on the part of the young hero. The guy approached the girl at the wrong time, and she perceived him as another unpleasant enemy. It was only a little later that Vanessa realized what she had done, but Choice had already lost consciousness by that time. Since then, lyrium has been hanging around Ray, wanting to repay him for his help. Although the girl dealt with the bandits herself, she was pleased to feel protected. Looking back, Choice wouldn't have come close to Vanessa now, as she fought so well. But his actions led the guy to have such a handsome English teacher. That day they studied again until the evening. As Ray was slow in memorizing the material, suddenly the couple of friends were caught by Chappie Wallington, who had been trying to charm the beautiful Lyrium for a long time. But Vanessa didn't even want to see this man who considered everyone around him to be trash. They were both children of wealthy parents. But the girl did not have a drop of arrogance or selfishness. This wasn't the first time Choice had seen a girl having to turn down an insolent guy. Chappie seemed to ignore all of Lyrium's words, talking to her with renewed vigor the next day. But Vanessa remained just as impenetrable, because she had no intention of dating such a person. No matter how hard the guy tried to hide it, she knew that all he wanted from her was status and money. Chappie was always really worried about how he would look in front of other people. So as soon as a crowd formed around, Wallington remembered the humiliation of poor Choice. Although Ray couldn't fight, he had an amazing skill of eloquence, which Chappie did not have. The blonde could boast about his money and influence as much as he wanted, but he was unable to offend the hero. But Choice managed to say a few unpleasant phrases at the end, after which he ran away with Vanessa. The girl appreciated Ray's rebuff, as he seemed like a quiet and exemplary guy. At that moment, the hero did not yet know that his behavior had earned him an unpleasant enemy in the person of Chappie. As usual, after a hard day at school, the hero took on part-time work as a taxi driver. The guy worked like this every day because his family really needed any money. Just in case, he carried the mug with him in the hope that the guy would come back for it. He rarely believed in coincidences, but the nightmares appeared right after receiving this item. The mug looked completely ordinary, except for the high-quality image of a beautiful girl. Because of the strange things that had been happening lately, the hero even began to think that this lady was a witch. But of course, there was no magic in his world, so there was no way that could be true. But only Choice thought so. But in reality, Lucielle was a real and powerful goddess. At that moment, she became so angry that for a moment the young man heard part of her voice. But once again, Ray thought that he had simply imagined it. Although his imagination had painted terrifying pictures, the guy believed in ghosts, so his heart almost jumped out of his chest because of the strange voice. So Choice hurried to leave the parking lot, because only at home could he feel safe. However, this time too, things didn't go according to plan, as Chappie and his gang were already waiting for the guy at the exit. Wallington was not about to accept the humiliation he had suffered today because of Choice. Past clashes with bandits taught the hero a lot, so he no longer walked the streets without a weapon. The guy couldn't fight as well as Vanessa, so he had other fighting methods. Chappie had assembled such a huge gang of assistants that he was sure that Ray would soon lose. So the hero had to choose between beating and fighting, and he chose the second option. For such cases, Choice had prepared a baton that could be compactly folded into a pocket. Many bandits were familiar with this weapon, which could cause enormous injuries. But Chappie didn't care, since he had a significant numerical advantage on his side. So the stupid guys rushed into battle against Ray, who no one could come to his aid. Despite the sad situation, Choice was not going to give up, because his life depended on it. The guy fought so bravely, as if the bandits would actually kill him if he lost. The club caused such severe damage that some of the enemies were soon knocked out of the battle. But there were still so many of them that Ray only lasted a few minutes in the fight. As soon as he became slightly distracted, his opponents immediately took advantage of the situation. Choice had never been in so much pain before, but he tried his best to remain calm and conscious. The young man's resistance only further angered the bandits, who were accustomed to easy prey. So their leader was thirsty for real revenge. Despite the fact that he could accidentally kill a person, he swung with all his might, putting into the blow all the rage that was raging inside him at that moment. Only at the last moment did the hero manage to defend himself with the mug he always carried with him. The most surprising thing was that the thing held up, and Choice had an opportunity to attack. His counterattack was so powerful that the leader was no longer able to rise from the floor due to pain. Choice felt like he had completely gone berserk, as a huge amount of anger had accumulated within him. Seeing his opponent's gaze like that, Chappie decided to run away so as not to lose in disgrace. It was clear from Ray's face that he would never back down and would be ready for any future battles. So the gang found nothing better to do than to go for reinforcements for tomorrow's attack. Although Choice was able to win, Blood was flowing through his body due to the injuries he had received, and one small drop landed right on the mug with the image of a beautiful goddess. Ray didn't notice how the picture suddenly absorbed the blood, as if nothing had dripped onto it. Just one drop helped Lucille gain access to Choice's life to control him. At that time, the hero had no idea that he had made a contract with the goddess, and now his life would change dramatically. Now his thoughts were only about how to quietly return back to the dorm to his friends. It just turned out that the friends were right in the middle of a battle and weren't even thinking about going to bed. Michael, Sally, and Wei often stayed up late, so they would pick up Choice from work late. As usual, the hero did not stand on ceremony with the taxi driver's clothes, which he had become tired of by this time. That evening, he was so tired that he didn't even play his friend's favorite battle game. Instead, the young man fell asleep so that no one would notice the bruises on her body. It so happened that immediately after this, the lights went out. So soon, the friends had to disperse. Morning arrived unnoticed by the entire dormitory, which had remained silent throughout the night. But due to fatigue, the hero could not wake up for a long time, although the goddess actively woke him up. Lucille was eager to meet the man who had signed a contract with her for the first time in a long time. So soon she moved on to more decisive actions, as she pulled the guy into her space. For a long time, Choice felt as if he had not yet woken up, even though he had opened his eyes. The guy didn't immediately realize that everything that was happening was reality, and not part of his imagination. Meanwhile, Lucille took the most convenient position to appear in front of the young man. As soon as Ray heard the familiar female voice, his heart sank into his heels. Choice couldn't even imagine that he would ever meet a girl in person at a club. His facial expression completely revealed the emotions of the guy who did not expect such a turn of events. The first thing that came to Choice's mind was panic, because everything that was happening was abnormal. But then his body reacted on its own at the sight of such a beautiful girl, as if a physically healthy guy could have any other reaction to a girl's half-naked body. At the sight of such grace, Choice forgot about everything in the world, surrendering himself to mental bliss. But the goddess was not going to remain silent while all sorts of fools and idiots drooled over her. The girl made it clear with one well-practiced blow that Ray should not have treated her like that. In fact, she didn't just drag him into the mug for no reason. There were important reasons for that. True, Lucille spent most of her time being angry, so she didn't have time to explain anything. But she prepared trials for the hero so that in the future he could free her from captivity. That dimension was already drawing the young man in, and in it, he could die only 100 times in all that time. And the first death overtook Choice as soon as he opened his eyes after the transfer. The guy didn't even have time to say a word before he found himself beheaded in a brutal battle with the pirates. The next time he got his bearings faster, so he managed to avoid the fatal blow of the sword. Ray had no idea where he was, but he was in this battle to survive. The ship with sailors was filled with pirates who were trying to capture such a rich vessel. Together with the others, the hero fought desperately to avoid dying once again from someone's sword. Each time, Choice started all over again and had to do the same actions again. The more the guy died, the more sequences for victory he remembered. So soon, Ray managed to recapture the ship, although it took several dozen lives. The pirates surrendered once their sheer numbers had become virtually zero. This is how the hero's quiet life on the ship began, because he had to hold out for 6 months. Out of boredom, Choice often listened to the whispers of sailors who knew many interesting legends, but they didn't impress him personally, since the guy knew the truth about this world. He eagerly awaited the moment when the giant hand of the goddess would take him back. Until then, Ray had to continue to fight the pirates who constantly attacked. In a few years that passed like a couple of days, the young man mastered all the principles of the art of fighting, so he no longer had to die at the hands of pirates who actively attacked the guy. And soon Choice achieved promotion among the sailors, thanks to his incredible abilities. For many, he became a legend who was able to return from any difficult battle in one piece. And only the hero knew the truth about how many lives he had gone through to achieve such a result. As soon as his trial time came to an end, the boy was transferred from this world. The constant fighting had become so tiresome for Choice that he was glad to return. But instead of the goddess, Michael appeared next to Ray, worried about his sleeping comrade. While the hero lived in that dimension, in reality, only one night passed for everyone. So it was strange for my friend to observe the changes that had taken place in Choice in such a short time. Ray returned from the sea world much matured on the inside, although on the outside, he remained the same. The guy quickly corrected his mistake, as he didn't want to scare any of his friends. No one would have believed him anyway if Choice had told him exactly what he had experienced during that time. The only thing that pleased the young man in this whole situation was that his strength and skills were completely preserved. But his anger at the goddess did not go away, because she brazenly moved the young man across dimensions. Luciel had nothing to say in response, as the girl dreamed of being freed from the curse. That's why she needed Choice, whose blood was recognized by the mug-shaped prison where the goddess was kept. And now, until the girl gains complete freedom, she will never let the poor hero go. Choice could be as angry at the goddess as he wanted, but there was still no turning back for him. It wasn't Luciel's fault that the young man's aura was suitable for the tests inside the circle. They had to be together for a long time, so they had to come to peace. But for now, Ray only dreamed of breaking the mug and forgetting about the goddess forever. But the hero's conscience did not allow him to do this, so he simply returned to his normal life. Fate again threw up difficulties as the boy's mother became seriously ill. Ray had no idea where he would get the money, but his father certainly didn't have enough for the treatment. With each passing month, the medicine became more expensive, but at least Mother remained alive. Choice could only help with part-time work, but he himself barely had enough money for a normal life. At that moment, the guy was so deep in thought that he didn't notice how his friend Vanessa bumped into him. The girl had time to miss her friend, with whom she had studied English just yesterday. But what bothered Choice most was that Lyrium noticed that his body had become much stronger. Vanessa had always been attentive and intelligent, and now this only hindered the hero. Before the friends had time to talk to each other, Chappie appeared on the horizon again along with the fighter. Even Lyrium couldn't handle a professional master, so she quickly ran away. The boy had been practicing Taekwondo since childhood, so he had no doubts about his victory. It was not by chance that Wallington chose him, because this time he wanted to teach Choice a lesson. If it weren't for 20 years of life in battle, Ray would definitely have lost to this master. But during that time, he had developed his skills so much that every blow from his opponent seemed slow to him. So, from the very beginning, the advantage was on Choice's side, although no one knew it. The hero easily repelled all of the master's attacks, while still managing to strike back. Vanessa watched this battle from the sidelines and did not believe that Ray could fight like that. Choice did not torment his opponent, because he understood that he would still win this battle. So soon the guy flew into the air with such a sound, as if he weighed nothing at all. As luck would have it, he landed on Chappie, and the guy didn't have the strength to get out of this situation. Wallington once again proved to be overconfident, which is why he lost the battle with Ray. The hero's patience had finally snapped, so that only threats were on the tip of his tongue. And this was enough for Chappie to no longer think about attacking the strong young man. Thus, Choice achieved an easy victory, effectively dealing with his impudent enemies. The situation had been on Vanessa's mind all evening, so she turned to her connections. The girl's uncle was one of the best spies when it came to obtaining complex information, but Lyrium still hoped that Choice would tell her on his own how he had achieved such results. The next evening, the hero went to work again, as he really needed money. And at that moment, Marriott Lyrium found Choice, wanting to talk to him personally behind Vanessa's back. It was no surprise that Ray immediately turned down this strange and unfamiliar man. But as soon as the man demonstrated his abilities, the hero's opinion changed. He was unable to withstand the blow that the unknown person used on the tree. So Choice chose to just talk to the man in the hopes that he would then go away. The hero had no other options anyway, since someone so powerful had taken an interest in him. But Marriott took the young man somewhere outside the dorm, not wanting to communicate in front of the cameras. As soon as they left the last observation zone, anxiety grew within the hero. They walked for so long that it became completely dark outside. But for some reason, the man did not stop. Choice knew he was defenseless without the cameras, so he didn't want to continue on his way. As soon as the young man expressed his dissatisfaction, Marriott nevertheless moved to decisive action. He didn't even warn Ray with a word as he hit him with half his strength using his internal energy. The hero's trained body allowed him to escape, although he also received minor injuries. As Ray feared, he was not strong enough to stand up to this man. Marriott was only interested in why Choice didn't use his internal energy in response. But the goddess didn't tell the hero anything about this, so he didn't know all the details. From the young man's eyes, his uncle guessed that he had told him the truth and was not trying to hide his powers. The elder Lyrium couldn't reveal his identity, so it was time to hide from the consequences. That's why the man disappeared so quickly, as if he had never appeared next to Choice at all. This incident gave Ray a lot to think about, as he didn't know that it was possible to become even stronger. Of course, improving his skills was the main goal for Choice, who wanted such a teacher for himself. Marriott was lucky that he managed to hide from the guy. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have left him alone. But thoughts about the young man's inner strength still bothered his uncle, so he continued to follow him. Having failed to find that person, the hero nevertheless went to work to give more people a ride. As usual, the girls paid attention to him, but the guy politely declined to continue the conversation. But that night, something went wrong as Choice noticed a powerful explosion near him. Ray's conscience didn't allow him to stay where he was, because there might be people there who needed help. He quickly reached the shore by car, but in his haste he was unable to park it. However, at that moment, Choice didn't care about the rules, as he was bursting with the desire to help. The boy quickly assessed the situation and realized that somewhere in the center of the lake, a wooden boat had caught fire. It was a structure that was built specifically for a short day of filming, so there were no safety measures in place for people in extreme situations. Rescuers were already hard at work in the water, pulling out people who were fleeing the fire. Choice learned all the details from random witnesses, so he realized that the situation was dangerous. But the worst thing was that two people were unable to get out of the burning boat. These were two sisters, Jasmine and Sarah, who starred in the producer's film. The girls were tied up tightly for a beautiful scene, but now they couldn't get out on their own. The organizers demanded that assistants lower the artists, but something went wrong. The mechanism of the structure jammed, and now there was no way to help the sisters from the outside. Meanwhile, the ship capsized, which meant that the girls would soon drown in water. People on the shore desperately screamed for help, but the rescuers did not have time to reach that boat. Only the hero could do this, because he spent many years in the water test of the goddess Lucielle. The guy bravely jumped into the water, realizing that no one else could help except him. As a result, in a matter of seconds, he developed such speed that the rescuers did not notice him. At that moment, Choice's heart filled with gratitude to the goddess who taught him to swim quickly. In the process, he discovered another girl who had been submerged along with the ship, but Ray didn't have time to save her, because the actresses were still lowered somewhere into the depths, so the hero only pushed this girl to the surface, where she would soon be rescued. His situation was not so bad, which cannot be said about the drowned Jasmine and Sarah. From this depth, the guy could barely see their silhouettes as the boat sank rapidly. The actresses were still tied up because they were unable to extricate themselves from the safety ropes. Sarah was still conscious, while her sister was unable to hold her breath for so long. So the eldest was ready to sacrifice herself, just to save her beloved sister. But Choice wanted to save two girls at once, although it would take a little more time. But one of the actresses had already decided that she would die underwater, just so that her sister could live on. The problem was that with these ropes, the young man would not be able to pull out any of the girls. Time was limited, and he was taking too long to figure out how to open this lock at all. But soon, Choice stubbornly headed straight towards Sarah, who knew she was about to lose consciousness. Finally, the girl admitted that she wanted to live and reached out to the hero's hands. She did indeed pass out in the process, but it didn't matter anymore because Ray caught her. Now that both actresses were fainting, the hero had to hurry to save them. The guy forced every muscle in his body to work so as not to slow down his swimming speed. His appearance was noticed almost immediately by the producer, who was afraid of losing such good actresses. At that moment, Choice miscalculated his strength, so he soared into the air as if he were a true sea god. But then the guy didn't care what impression he made on the people around him. The hero's primary task was to save the girls, who were still not breathing. During the test, he learned to almost resurrect people who had taken a lot of water into their lungs. So it wasn't difficult for Ray to bring Jasmine to her senses, causing the girl to cough loudly. But Choice didn't stop, because there was still Sarah, who still showed no signs of life. Thanks to his efforts, within a couple of minutes, both girls had fully recovered. Only now did Choice notice what beauties he had saved, although he hadn't noticed it. But what made Ray most uncomfortable was that his appearance still left much to be desired. He didn't plan to become famous all over the world in such shabby and sad underpants. So, despite the persuasion from others, the young man silently ran away from the boat so as not to get caught. He swam so fast that he soon reached the other side of the lake in the hope that no one would find him. But somehow, the shocked people noticed Choice here too, wanting to express their gratitude to him. In a panic, Ray couldn't think of anything better to do than disguise himself with an old man's pathetic hat. But even this could not help him hide from his pursuers, since the hero had not learned to run fast. Meanwhile, two actresses were receiving medical assistance after they nearly died in the water. It so happened that Choice hid from the crowd just near the group he saved. The producer was one of the first to notice the man who impressed him with his amazing skills. And only Ray was not happy that he was caught by people again, because he did not want everyone's attention. But no one in the group began to shout loudly that a brave savior was standing before them. Instead, the guys calmly gave Choice clothes, which helped him a lot. While the young man was trying to tidy up his appearance, he didn't notice that someone was watching him. But Jasmine didn't miss the fact that her sister, for some reason, was in the clouds with an absent-minded look. The whole point was that Sarah developed feelings for the man who didn't leave her in the water. At that moment, the sister attributed everything to the fact that the older one simply felt unwell after the water. They did indeed have to undergo a medical examination before the girls were allowed to go home. Even the usually strong Jasmine felt uneasy, although she tried her best to put on a brave face. At that moment, Sarah managed to hide from her sister the fact that she had fallen a little in love with the hero. Since Choice needed help with clothing, he turned to the actors with this question. The guy couldn't even imagine that none of his assistants would be able to offer him anything normal. The employee tried to be polite to the man who had made such a big splash in the news. It seemed to him that it would be advantageous to make friends with Ryam now, in order to make a profit in the future. But Choice had no plans to make new acquaintances, as he was in a hurry to get back on the road. Only with the help of a decent amount of money did the assistant become interested in the hero who needed them. The young man strenuously pretended that Choice really deserved this gift, since he saved two actresses. So the guy didn't think long when he agreed to accept such gratitude for his help. But even this didn't make Ray agree to a cup of coffee over a pleasant conversation. He was in such a hurry to leave that he didn't notice the producer, Mr. Gordon, appearing at the door. Both men had strong foreheads, but that didn't mean they didn't feel pain. The producer immediately expressed everything he thought about the man who had treated him so rudely. But as soon as he saw Choice in the ancient costume, the man was immediately inspired to make the film. Gordon, always a cunning man, knew that Ray had temporarily become popular in society. But the young man was only interested in whether they were paying for acting, since he had been invited to appear in the film. One of Gordon's strengths was that he always generously rewarded all his employees after work. Such a large sum immediately impressed the hero, who always needed money. So the guy no longer had any reason to refuse to film a few scenes. Gordon couldn't stop Choice right now, but he could at least come to an agreement with him about the future. Ray ran away so quickly that the actresses didn't have time to thank him for their recent difficult rescue. But the producer was confident that the girls would still have such an opportunity, because he had thought of everything. Meanwhile, Choice was running as fast as he could to his car, which he had parked very incorrectly. So it was no surprise that several police officers had already crowded around her. But it turned out that the men knew about the car owner's exploits, so they weren't angry with him. This was the most pleasant surprise of the whole evening for Choice, who was afraid for the abandoned car. A few days later, nothing had changed for Sarah, and she still thought only about the hero. It was an unusual experience for her sister, as the older one usually behaved much more reservedly. But Jasmine was glad that her little sister had finally fallen in love with at least some guy. Now her task was to help her sister gain recognition from that brave guy. Meanwhile, news about the hero in underwear quickly spread across the internet due to its popularity. No one could say for sure who this guy was, which only made people more curious to know the truth. Witnesses that day only recorded part of the hero's underwear, which was partially torn. That's why Choice didn't want to admit to anyone that he was the one who saved those girls from the water. So, as soon as his classmates started such conversations, the guy immediately changed the subject. It worked for a while, but soon something went wrong. Because Michael turned out to be attentive, she remembered that Choice had exactly the same underwear, and that he had been absent for a long time that night. More than anything, Choice was afraid that one of his friends would suspect him of saving people. The guy's only argument was that he had always been weak, so he didn't know how to swim at all. Ray would never admit that he actually helped the girls, because it would draw attention to him. Fortunately, Grace Samper did not believe that Choice had the strength to save the two beautiful ladies. Usually the hero was in conflict with this guy, But now he was grateful to him for such words. Only his friends could not calmly tolerate the bullying with which Gray was generous. But Choice was smart enough to stop a conflict that would lead to nothing good for them. This was not the first time the boys had responded to such barbs, and always found themselves punished. So this time, head girl Rosalie especially begged her friends not to do anything. It so happened that the girl pulled on the sleeve of Choice's shirt, and it cracked at the seam from old age. The guy was very upset by this turn of events, but he did not scold the frightened girl. Soon the bell rang, so Rosalie had to go to the board with the news in such a mood. As soon as she said that they would have a new teacher, there was an immediate uproar among the class. The grown-up students behaved like young school children, as they were in anticipation of the beauty. As soon as the teacher entered the classroom, their eyes lit up with joy, because the girl was very attractive. Although none of the boys had wanted to take part in the competition before, they now agreed. Sally even promised to become a champion, just to attract the teacher's attention. That's because Suzanne Logwood was one of the most wonderful teachers in the world. As a result, the headman didn't even have to persuade anyone to take part in the competition. Only Choice was not eager to show off his abilities, as he did not need the hype. While his friends were rejoicing at the upcoming opportunity, the boy himself tried to escape to his home. Ray had so much to do that he didn't want to participate in any test for the sake of the university. But Rosalie didn't let the young man leave, since everyone had to sign up somewhere. Little did Choice know that his participation in the competition would still be needed for the sake of numbers. Initially, the hero wanted to refuse, but Gray's hurtful words quickly changed his mind. Before Rosalie could even blink, the quiet and exemplary guy's expressions suddenly changed. Having survived many years in the sea world, the hero was no longer going to tolerate insults directed at him. Only Rosalie's presence stopped Choice from making further threats, as he didn't want to scare her. So this time, Ray let Samper go too quickly, even though he often behaved insolently. As soon as Choice calmed down, the headman again reminded him about signing up for one of the competitions. Since the hero was the last one left, he had no choice. But Ray could never take part in the swimming, because everyone would see his abilities. True, the guy could no longer refuse, since the headman promptly added him to the list. Gray found something to say this time too, as he was sure that Choice would definitely lose the swimming match. But he failed to prove anything to the headman, because what was important to her was participation, not victory. But Samper couldn't calm down so easily, so he already came up with a plan for revenge. Meanwhile, the hero and his friends were heading towards the dorm, as classes were over. As usual, the guys argued with each other, and only Choice did not take part in the quarrels. Wei was especially active in proving his case every time, not wanting to be left behind his friends. But his stubbornness only angered Michael even more, who always had the last word. Among his friends, the hero was the calmest, but the guys still treated him well. At the most inopportune moment, Choice's phone rang because Vanessa missed him. Michael couldn't resist making another joke about Ray going after other girls instead of her. But Lyrium didn't even think of believing all these words, since she only trusted Choice's behavior. This time, the hero was so tired that he didn't want to study, although he agreed to meet the girl. As he expected, Vanessa was less than enthusiastic about his suggestion to play computer games. Until now, Choice had to hide the fact that he had already learned English during the test. If Ray had honestly confessed everything to Lyrium, he would have definitely become a crazy student for many. Therefore, the hero's plan was to avoid English classes, and now he has succeeded brilliantly. Vanessa, however, could not resist her friend's requests, since she herself had not played for quite a long time. Initially, the boy and girl had a good attitude towards the game, but Choice didn't know how to do anything at all. So in a short time, he had to face a lot of negative words from the players. If Lyrium had known about Ray's level in advance, it would hardly have agreed to play on the same team with him. But it was too late to change anything. So Vanessa was not upset and enjoyed their time together. Due to their constant studying, they rarely had fun together, and the girl liked to relax at the computer. It's worth saying that from the moment he met the goddess, Choice carried her mug with him everywhere. And it so happened that at that very moment, Lucille again pulled the hero into her world. As soon as the girl laughed at Ray's gaming skills, he did not hesitate to hit her. Lucille did not appreciate such courage of Choice, because in fact she was famous among the gods. Ray had accumulated so much anger towards the girl that she sent him to some kind of test without his consent. In fact, the goddess expected something like this, since people were not always happy with her. Lucille didn't want to shout from above in response to Choice's objections, so she quickly descended. But her fall was so uncontrollable that it almost hit the hero with a sound wave. The goddess clearly miscalculated her strength, and therefore found herself in such a sad situation. Before, it had never occurred to Choice that even gods could be damaged for some reason. The only thing that scared him in this situation was that he would have to remain forever in this incomprehensible dimension. For quite a long time, the girl did not come to her senses, which aroused the young man's suspicions. He had no idea what to do if the goddess suddenly stopped responding. But soon, Lucille woke up and showed the full force of her anger due to the young hero's inaction. The girl did not feel sorry for the guy, despite the fact that he was her only savior at that moment. The rapid succession of blows sent Choice flying so far away, it was as if he hadn't been hit by a fragile girl at all. Ray didn't expect the goddess to be so angry, so he didn't even try to defend himself from her. Lucille only stopped beating her because Choice was still needed to free her. Otherwise, she would have definitely punished the guy even more severely for not trying to save her. Although Ray did not feel any guilt, he obediently accepted all the punishments from the girl. It seemed to him that this was the easiest way to achieve peace. So the young man did not try to fight back. Since they were in a similar situation, Choice did not want to quarrel with the goddess anymore. Lucille herself understood that without Ray's help, she wouldn't be able to get out of this boring place. This time the girl took pity on the guy, who would suffer for a long time for the sake of her desires. So she talked about how the mug itself chooses what the next test will be. Usually, she focuses on what surrounds the hero at the moment when the next test is ready. No matter how serious Lucille was, when Ray saw her beauty, completely different thoughts came to his mind. The goddess did not immediately realize that her ward was again thinking about something that he should not have thought about. So with her righteous anger, she sent Choice into another test without a choice. This is how the hero found himself on the path to another dimension, where he will hone his skills. Until now, the guy could not get used to what he felt in such unusual moments with movements. This time, the location was radically different from the first, as the essence of the test was completely different. The last thing Ray expected to see in this place was a real computer and a gaming chair. The boy suspected that the tests partially duplicated his life, but he didn't think it was that much. At first, Choice even liked the fact that all he had to do was win all the games in a row. It seemed to him that he would quickly figure out the rules of the game, since the guy periodically played with friends. But everything was far from as simple as he would have liked. So Choice was stuck for a long time. The more time he tried to win, the more the young man hated any computer games. After a month, Ray had the feeling that he had been playing endlessly and was not tired at all. Suddenly, he managed to achieve the long-awaited victory, which immediately brought the young man back to reality. For the first few seconds, the hero could not believe that his torment was finally over. Vanessa didn't even notice that her friend had been absent for a long time, since nothing had changed for her. The only thing that worried the girl was that their loss was close due to Choice's poor play. But now the hero knew so much that he was sure that they would definitely win the game. Ray was not averse to showing off all the skills he had acquired. It was not for nothing that he had played so much. This time, his skillful attacks sent everyone flying around so fast that they couldn't block them in time. As a result, everything ended with an easy victory for Choice's team, who had trained well in the challenge. For a long time, Vanessa could not believe that her friend was simply hiding his true abilities. It was no surprise that the girl had a lot of questions for Ray, who had won so well. But the guy couldn't tell the truth, so he temporarily ran away under the pretext of feeling unwell. So Lyrium's suspicions only grew stronger, since she still couldn't understand anything. But the girl had already begun to believe that her friend would gradually open his soul to her. Even after several minutes, the hero could not get over the game and that gaming challenge. But he had no time to be weak, as Vanessa was curious about him. Choice couldn't think of anything better to do than lie about having a slight cold once again. Only this cooled the hot temper of Lyrium a little, who always sought answers to questions. The girl was so afraid for her friend that she inadvertently moved too close to him. But Choice was a physically healthy guy who found it difficult to get so close to him calmly. Luckily for him, Vanessa quickly moved away, so the immediate danger soon disappeared. Since it was already quite late, the girl dragged her friend home so as not to oversleep her classes. Of course, before leaving, the hero did not forget to take the goddess with him. Otherwise, she would still scold him. On the way to the dorm, the boy and the girl talked to each other for a long time about various topics. Because it was late at night, Vanessa was against her friend going to work as a taxi driver, so the guy once again had to lie about not doing anything like that. But as soon as Lyrium left, the young man immediately rushed to the car that was parked nearby. Choice was in such a hurry that he didn't notice that Vanessa had clearly seen him escape from the dorm. That night, Ray's very first order turned out to be so strange that he already thought about canceling it. The client kept demanding to be left alone because she was very sleepy. It was the first time in his life that Choice had encountered such a situation, but he still decided to check out the place. It was located just near the hostel, so the guy almost didn't lose any time. For some time, the hero was guided only by the sound of the telephone, which was playing loudly somewhere in the middle of the street. It was only thanks to this that he soon found a young girl who had drunk herself into oblivion late at night. The stranger clearly felt so bad that she was unable to even open her eyes. It was precisely these girls who most often became victims of guys who were not embarrassed by their condition. And the impudent guys didn't hang around the girl for long because they immediately liked her appearance. The girl's name was Tali Guan, and she was actually decent. But this time, she overdid it with alcohol. Her feeble attempts to brush the men off only made them laugh, because the girl was at their mercy. The guys were already imagining in their heads what exactly they would do to the beauty during the night. Although the hero usually didn't give rides to drunk people, he couldn't ignore this behavior from strangers. In a matter of seconds, he scattered the men to the side so that they could not do anything to Tali. The impudent guys didn't even have time to understand what had happened before they found themselves beaten and humiliated. But Choice didn't stop there, because he hated with all his heart anyone who took advantage of people. Only when the boys begged for mercy did Ray decide that he had punished them enough for their insolence. Despite the noise around her, Guan never came to her senses, as she was in a state of insanity, so the hero had to personally drag the girl to the car so that no one else would approach her. This is how the unknown men were left without any profit, even though they had completely different plans for the evening. And our taxi driver left with Tali, although he had no idea how this rescue would end for him. What the young man feared most was that the stranger would never come to her senses, and he didn't know what to do with her. In the car, Guan fell asleep even more deeply, so all that was left was to drive her to the specified address. Soon, Choice arrived at the right place, but he had no further instructions. The houses around looked the same, and it was impossible to understand where the girl lived. The only thing Ray could do to help her was buy her medication to ease the effects of alcohol. Although all this was not included in the taxi driver's services, the hero could not leave the girl alone in the middle of the night. He barely managed to force at least a little water into the girl so that she would feel better later. All this time, Ray thought with horror that the lady was lucky to meet such a good man like him. If it weren't for this strange situation, the young man would have returned to the dorm long ago. As a result, he had to sleep in the car, guarding the sleep of an unknown girl due to her condition. Just as Choice fell asleep for a while, Tali suddenly opened her eyes and panicked. It was understandable, since this was the first time in her life that the girl found herself in a car with a stranger. But Ray wasn't going to silently endure the hysteria of the stranger he had been trying to help all this time. But his face still seemed dangerous to Tali, who was not used to trusting strangers. The first thing she did was threaten the young man with the police, as she had not had time to sort out the situation. But the truth was on Choice's side. Despite the fact that he cleverly threw the lady out of the car, having come to her senses, Tali still could not believe that this man had really done nothing to her. But Ray had nothing to fear, because both in his soul and on paper, he was completely clean. While the girl was panicking and photographing his car, the young man happily posed for her. He was confident that Tali would soon realize her mistake and ask him for forgiveness. In this situation, the only thing that made the hero happy was that he could finally return to his home. That's how the story of the night job ended, for which the guy helped only one client. Once Choice left, Guan gradually began to understand that nothing terrible had happened to her. The realization hit the girl the moment she actually saw a taxi order on her phone. Only now did Tali realize that she had accidentally yelled at the man who had driven her home. As the hero thought, literally a few minutes later, the girl began trying to reach him by phone. But he didn't even think about picking up the phone, because he didn't want to forgive her so easily for such behavior. Although Choice returned to the room very late, for some reason the lights were on in all the corridors. The guy immediately suspected something was wrong, and when he saw his underwear, He realized that he had been exposed, but Ray tried so hard to hide it even from his friends that he was the savior of the two actresses. As if on cue, his classmates jumped out of hiding as soon as Choice saw their bait. They were confident that they had exposed their friend, and no lie of his would deceive them again. It was Michael who figured out Ray because he remembered one remarkable feature on his underwear. Never in his life would the hero have thought that he would be exposed because of a hole in the bottom of his clothes. Since there was no way back, Choice had to tell his friends the whole truth about himself. Sally was most impressed by this because he had read all the news about the sea hero. Even Wei was overly emotional this time, as he was able to touch a true legend. What confused Choice most was Michael's behavior, which genuinely admired the possible awards. Although with great difficulty, Ray still managed to calm down his friends who were making noise in the middle of the night. The last thing the hero wanted in the world was to attract attention to himself because of his recent exploits, so he could only hope that the guys wouldn't reveal his identity to anyone. The next morning, only Choice arrived at the university on time, as his friends were not used to little sleep, and at that moment, his classmates noticed him and began to pay more attention to the guy. The girls knew about the head girl's sympathy for Ray, and therefore supported her on this path. Rosalie herself still denied her feelings, although it was true that she began to observe Choice more often. This time her friends won, as they pushed the girl towards the guy. Ray had no idea that it was not for nothing that the headman had been talking to him so kindly lately. It seemed to him that the girl was only concerned with the success of their group, so she controlled everything herself. So the guy calmly gave Rosalie compliments that made her heart beat faster. If only the head woman had been braver, she would have asked Choice to date her long ago, but she was only able to talk a little with the boy during breaks. All this caused wild jealousy in Gray, who had tender feelings for the headman. So the guy did everything he could to make Choice's swimming competition more difficult. Just a couple of days later, the head of the department happily announced the start of a university competition. By this point, Ray had prepared himself well, but he still felt awkward. What bothered the guy most was the huge number of stairs from which he could not hide. Rosalie's friends constantly consoled her, but her heart still beat wildly at the sight of Choice. From the very beginning, Ray sensed something was wrong, because the entire competition could not go smoothly. He remembered that Samper held a terrible grudge against him, so he didn't believe that the guy had done nothing. The truth was revealed to the young man the moment he saw who exactly he would be testing with. Rosalie immediately recognized Choice's opponents as athletes who had been swimming for a long time, but Gray had no intention of admitting that he had somehow influenced people's choices. The girls could only hope that all these guys would not be a hindrance to Choice. At first glance, it was clear how much the competitors differed in physical fitness. Only Ray was sure that such a setup was initiated by Gray Samper. The swimmers were relaxed, as they had no doubt whatsoever of their own victory. Even though the test was unfair, even the judge couldn't do anything about it. So the guys were confident that they would soon embarrass Choice in front of everyone. The hero couldn't help but laugh at the thought of their stupidity, because this time, he would never lose. None of the swimmers even suspected that Ray had been learning to swim for many years in another world. So he was one of the first to jump into the water as soon as the judge gave the signal to start. But something went wrong right from the start, as only the hero made a huge splash. Choice was used to different conditions when jumping, so he accidentally failed to enter the water. The audience froze in surprise, as no one expected such a failure in the first seconds. But many were afraid to jump to conclusions about who would actually win. Vanessa was also sitting among the fans, believing only in her friend's victory. While Gray had no doubt that one of the team he hired would win, he tried to convince the headman of this, but the girl only supported Choice louder. Rosalie's actions attracted the attention of Lyrium, who had heard about Ray's other friends. The girl was from a different university, so she didn't know anyone the guy was talking to without her. But now the hero had no time to care about who had come to cheer for him at this competition. The guy only watched his rivals, who were rapidly breaking ahead of him, so he soon moved on to a real naval battle, in which he had no equal. It was not for nothing that Choice was proud of his swimming, because he had survived at sea for many years in a row. In a matter of minutes, he gained such speed that he easily pulled ahead of his rivals. This wiped all the confidence from Gray's face, because he had expected a completely different result. At that moment, the hero was no longer afraid that someone would recognize him as the savior of the two actresses. He was so absorbed in the swimming process that he was not concerned with any of the nuances of victory. Choice's speed was unmatched, as in another world he had outpaced the sea monster itself. So it was no surprise that many athletes couldn't even keep up with Ray. They had been learning to swim for many years, but it all seemed insignificant compared to the hero's skills. Of course, the guys couldn't just give up on a task to which they had devoted their whole soul. Even their coach was surprised to see Choice's speed, which he hadn't noticed before. As soon as the hero pulled ahead, Rosalie's joy knew no bounds, because she supported him. Once again, Choice surprised Vanessa, even though she thought she knew almost everything about the guy. But as a result, Ray once again found something to discourage the girl, despite the close communication between them. Uncle Marriott had been secretly watching the boy all this time and was worried about him. The man desperately tried to prove to his niece that her friend was hiding some secrets, but Lyrium believed in the man who had so bravely saved her several months ago. The girl always trusted her uncle in such matters, but now their opinions about Choice were radically different. While Marriott was searching for Ray's secrets, Vanessa remained by the side of her friend, who seemed like a good man to her. The only thing that bothered Lyrium was that his uncle hadn't managed to find out anything about young Choice. So now this whole investigation was left on Vanessa's shoulders, since Marriott could no longer help. This was not the first time the girl had used her family connections to reveal other people's secrets, but this time she would like Choice to tell her something important about himself on his own. In the end, the competition ended with the hero's victory, which he had no doubt about from the very beginning. Ray acted like a true gentleman because he didn't laugh at the guys who lost. The athletes were already feeling bad because they hadn't overtaken some puny guy. With his victory, Choice attracted not only the attention of the stands, but also the swimming coach himself. The man became seriously interested in the guy who showed such good results. Previously, the hero had not thought about building a career as a real athlete, but many of them received huge amounts of money if they managed to achieve a high status. Ray needed money so much that he was ready to take on absolutely any job. But it turned out that not everything was so simple, since the coach could not immediately put out a new swimmer. Although the young man liked the idea of becoming rich, he needed it in a fairly short time. So Choice was forced to give up a career as an athlete, which takes many years to achieve. This is how the coach was left without a man who could easily have become the best on his team. Along the way, Ray accidentally collided with one of the swimmers whom he had easily overtaken recently. The guy emanated a terribly creepy energy, but it was not capable of frightening the hero even a little. The young man could not simply forget the humiliation that his rival had accidentally subjected him to. But Choice wouldn't have lost another time either, because swimming had become his native sport. At the end of the trials, Rosalie was disappointed in Gray, who initially did not believe in Choice. All of Samper's actions were dictated by jealousy, so he was ready to do anything just to talk to the girl. So he agreed to ask Ray for forgiveness, just so Rosalie would think better of him. At that moment, the hero had no idea what kind of entertainment was about to unfold. But when he saw Samper, he immediately laughed, because his classmate had been defeated. Gray was deeply hurt by Choice's behavior, but he tried to hold on for the sake of the beautiful headman's attention. He tried his best to maintain a relationship with the girl, so he tolerated his opponent's antics. Ray knew Samper too well not to believe the sincerity of his apology. But this time, the red-haired guy pretended to the last that he wanted to achieve friendship between them. The hero sensed something was wrong, but his intuition didn't tell him what it was all about. As a result, the guy didn't have time to understand anything, since the swimming coach was chasing him again. No matter how many times Choice refused the man, he still continued to beg him to become his apprentice. Gray benefited from the enemy's disappearance, as he could return to his original plan. At the end of the day, the young man wanted to visit an incredibly expensive restaurant with the headman, so he lied about having booked a place there. And now there is no way to cancel the reservation. At that moment, the hero did not yet know that he had left Rosalie with a dangerous man, and he should not have done this. He acted relaxed until the headman's friends called him with alarm. Until the very end, Choice refused to believe that Gray had done any harm to young Rosalie. But intuition mercilessly told the hero that this matter was not so simple. Samper was impossible to reach by phone, but Ray was lucky enough to quickly find his friends. These guys only seemed tough on the surface, but they ran away in fear at the first opportunity. So Choice had only a few seconds to catch these cowardly people by surprise. His face just said that these guys had better answer all the questions nicely. But Gray's friends were so stupid that they didn't take the frail guy's threats seriously. Most often, they resolved their affairs with their fists, and only the language of struggle was understood by them down to the smallest detail. That's why Ray couldn't avoid a fight. Otherwise, the guys would have simply run away from him. And now they were burning with the desire to overcome the man who was behaving so brazenly nearby. But in a matter of seconds, Choice scattered each of them, since they were completely incapable of fighting. The hero did not spare any of the boys in order to teach them a good lesson before future battles. As soon as Samper's last friend fell to the floor, all their resistance ended. Only after this did the hero find out exactly where Rosalie was located, along with the nasty Gray. Of course, the boys couldn't help but warn Samper about the danger that had been created because of them. They periodically betrayed their friend, but each time they saved him in time from terrible consequences. But this time, it turned out that none of them could get through to either Gray or Rosalie. This is all because Samper had previously purchased a device that would block all calls. He needed this so that Rosalie would lose track of time and no one would be able to reach her. The girl thought about just eating and going home, not noticing Gray's disgusting face. When she tried to go home, she realized that she could barely stand on her own feet. Samper thought of everything down to the last detail, and even added a special agent to Rosalie's mug. All this in order to spend an unforgettable night with her, which will change the life of the headman. By this point, the girl was in such a state that she could barely understand what was happening. If it weren't for Choice's sudden appearance, something irreparable would have happened to Rosalie that night. But Ray appeared at the right moment, so Samper didn't have time to do anything to the young headman. As soon as the hero realized the state the girl was in, rage took over his mind. If Gray hadn't gotten into a fight, Choice wouldn't have touched him. But the situation turned out differently, so it was Samper who got hit hard in the face since he was much weaker than his opponent. Previously, the redhead had no idea that Ray could be so strong even in a normal fight. Gray didn't even think about fighting fairly. But even that didn't help him land a single blow on the hero. Choice ended his series of punches with a painful kick that left Samper unable to get up. This battle ended so quickly that the hero didn't even get tired after beating up his classmate. They were still in the restaurant, and the waitresses could not allow such behavior from the guests. But Choice was only too glad the police were called, as he wanted to hold Gray seriously accountable. He didn't even think of coming to the establishment alone, but his friends showed up much later than the hero. However, the boy was still able to entrust them with the care of the headman, who almost suffered at the hands of Gray. The young man himself wanted to meet with the police in person to tell them the whole truth about what happened. At that moment, Choice did not yet know that Samper would definitely use this situation against him. As a result, a beautiful policewoman named C.L. Morius began to interrogate the hero. She was consumed by righteous anger, because the guy had no right to beat his classmate like that. The girl latched onto the fact that Gray had multiple injuries and no one else was hurt. Even her colleague was embarrassed by the fury with which CL conducted a routine interrogation this time. But Choice didn't believe he would actually be punished because he was defending himself and Rosalie. But Morius, until the very end, sought confirmation that Ray was simply lying to her. However, even a local nurse confirmed that a strong sleeping pill was found in Rosalie's blood. This was not what CL wanted to hear, in whose head it was Choice who was the bad person. Whatever the test results, there was never any doubt about their reliability. But Morius still wasn't going to let go of the guy who started a brutal fight in the restaurant. Everything could have ended faster and easier, if not for the appearance of the mother of the victim, Gray. The woman desperately demanded retribution because she did not believe that her son could have done anything bad. Ciel had to show Madame irrefutable evidence, but even that had no effect on her. She was sure that all this was just a cunning conspiracy against the beautiful Samper. If it weren't for Choice's friends, who collected evidence back in the restaurant, the madam could have achieved her goal. But the boys appeared at such a time that the woman could no longer claim to have a good son. Even Rosalie came to the station, despite the fact that she was still very sleepy. But the girl would not forgive herself if, because of her, Choice received some unpleasant punishment. At the sight of the headman, the madam became so angry that she was ready to personally punish the girl for everything. But they were at the police station, and the deputies did not allow the woman to do anything bad. By her behavior, the elder Samper made it clear to everyone that her son was just as disgusting. But CL still didn't want to let Choice go for personal reasons. Despite all the evidence, she was also not bothered by the fact that Rosalie had no intention of leaving the station until Choice was released. At that moment, the hero did not know what lengths his friends had gone to in order to free him from prison. He was completely alone for a long time until a policewoman finally visited him. Ciel still lacked a reason to detain Choice, but she was actively looking for one. In the end, the hero had to take the blame, although he believed that he had done the right thing. And at that very moment, Morius came up with a reason to keep the guy in the station for a few days. The last thing Choice wanted was to waste precious time sitting behind police bars. His only salvation could be the goddess. But for that, he had to pray well. But the young man had no desire to return to a dimension where only trials awaited him. But Lucielle's ghost still insisted on its own, since Ray had no other choice. As a result, the space around the hero began to slowly change, which he desperately did not want. In a fit of emotion, the guy accidentally scared Ciel, who didn't expect such a violent reaction from him. Morius could not have imagined that freedom was so important to this young man. Meanwhile, the hero was already moving in his head into the subconscious, specially created by the goddess. He didn't want to be here again, but there was no other choice for freedom in reality. This time, Lucielle kept all her clothes on so that there would be no more misunderstandings. So Choice felt almost no embarrassment at the sight of such a beautiful girl. The boy inadvertently reminded Lucielle that she was not acting like a true goddess. These words became a challenge for the girl who always protected her pride and dignity in front of others. The goddess instantly appeared before the guy in her most terrifying and menacing form. This made a strong impression on Choice, so he no longer thought of laughing at the girl. In fact, deep down, Lucielle was still kind, so she didn't want to scare the stupid boy. Only now did Choice realize that the goddess had not summoned him because of another test. It turned out that the girl heard the guy's hysteria, and therefore thought that he was in some kind of danger. Ray really did sincerely believe that he couldn't stay locked up, because he had a lot of important things to do. In the end, Lucielle finally agreed to help the young man, since he rarely asked her for anything. The guy had no idea what the goddess would come up with, but he hoped that this method would still work. As soon as he closed his eyes, he quickly returned to reality, where a policewoman was already waiting for him. If the girl had been in a threatening mood before, now she suddenly changed her mind. Ciel was affected by the goddess's spell, which sent feelings towards the guilty guy onto her. That's how Choice got his freedom. Although, until the very end, he didn't believe that it was real. Morius didn't have time to figure out why she suddenly changed her mind. Freedom was so desirable for the guy that he did not ask the policewoman any unnecessary questions, while Ciel never got rid of the goddess's spell that had forever taken over her mind. Near the site, Rosalie was still waiting for Choice, because he saved her from an unpleasant night with Gray. But the guy didn't feel like a savior, since he still had to pay the fine. Only now did the headman notice that for some reason, Ray was walking around everywhere with the same mug. She was very interested in this thing, and Choice had no problem showing it to the headman up close. But the young man didn't expect that immediately after this, the girl with a blush on her cheeks would run away. Lucielle had always been one to show off her clothes, but now she has suddenly chosen a bikini. The hero found himself in an awkward situation, as it was at that moment that Rosalie saw the image. The guy would never have thought that the goddess would let him down so badly after she helped him. Choice begged Lucille for a long time to return to normal clothes, but it did not help. The whole point was that the girl had no other choice, since she had spent all her strength. As soon as the hero returned to the dormitory, he heard a huge number of screams even before he got there. During his time with his friends, Choice became accustomed to the fact that they often became deeply immersed in games. But this time, the boys outdid themselves, as they didn't even notice their friend's return. Only Michael briefly turned to look at Ray, since the game was more important to him at that moment. Never before had the hero felt so lonely next to the people who were his friends. That evening, he couldn't resist and joined the guys to make up for lost time. And just a few days later, Choice went to a competition where beautiful girls would run. During this time, Michael really got on the hero's nerves by constantly laughing at his unusual mug. Ray even had to buy a case for the goddess. But all this did not save him from his friend's ridicule. Michael was well acquainted with Choice's friends, who had competed in the race together today. The hero would have preferred that Vanessa and Rosalie did not collide with each other. But fate decided otherwise. On command, both girls rushed forward. But the difference in their strength was great. Lyrium quickly overtook all her rivals, as she had been training and running almost her entire life. Although Rosalie had been competing for a long time, she could never catch up with her rival. Choice knew that Vanessa would never give up the victory, as she hated giving in to others. And indeed, soon the girl was the first to cross the victory line without losing to anyone. Rosalie literally missed her by a bit and accidentally fell due to carelessness at the very end. Lyrium was kind enough to help her rival, since they were not officially at odds with each other. But the headman did not want to accept help from the man who was the reason she did not come first. Their fight ended with Vanessa saying something to Rosalie that set the girls on fire. The hero understood that he should not interfere in their affairs, even though he was the center of attention. As soon as the guy tried to escape from the competition, Michael quickly stopped him. Ray didn't want to separate the two friends now, so he left all the showdown to his good friend. Michael was only too happy to talk to such beauties, although they didn't even look at him. Meanwhile, Choice himself went to work, as he still needed money for his mother. But Ciel didn't let the young man have a proper ride, because she reminded him of the fine for beating him. At that time, Ray didn't have any money yet, so he just asked the police for a deferment. Literally the next day, a new stage of the swimming competition began, where the hero was also present. The young man continued to show such remarkable results that no one could overtake him. So the mood of the fans quickly changed from distrust to enthusiasm towards Choice. Ray still hasn't gotten used to such increased attention, as he always remained in the shadows. But he was pleased with the support from Rosalie, who never missed a single one of her friends' competitions. Choice didn't miss the change in the headmistress's behavior after she talked to Vanessa. But once again, the arrogant coach did not give the guy the opportunity to relax after swimming. Ray was reluctant to join the swim team, so he constantly played tag with the man. So that day, the hero did not have a normal conversation with the headman, who had something to say to him. Since it was impossible to establish contact with Rosalie, Choice called Vanessa at the first opportunity, but the girl did not reveal her secrets, since this would contradict her behavior. What surprised Ray most was that Lyrium even knew about his imprisonment after the recent events. Although the hero managed to avoid being sent to prison, he didn't even tell his friends anything about it. The only thing that made him happy in this whole situation was that his skills were growing at a rapid pace. Since Choice still hadn't paid the fine, Ciel looked for him near the dorm that evening. The girl arrived just in time to notice a crowd of unpleasant-looking guys. They were sent specifically to harm Ray, but no one knew about it. Only Morius decided to follow them, as her intuition told her that something was wrong here. As usual, Choice returned home late, as he had been collecting a lot of orders in the evening. This time, he was so overjoyed that he didn't immediately notice the threat in the form of a brick that was thrown at him. That's why Ray didn't even have time to dodge, even though his reaction was better than many athletes. This circumstance angered the hero so much that he immediately got out of the car to sort things out. The only thing that stopped him was that he didn't want to get involved in the conflict before someone from the police arrived. As soon as the young man thought about the police, Ciel quickly appeared near the bandits. She saw this attack perfectly well, so at that moment she could not stay away. But the hero would have preferred to see anyone but this arrogant girl. The boys didn't perceive Morius as a threat at all, because she looked too fragile. They laughed boldly at her desire to protect Choice, who was now facing a beating. But Ciel wasn't joking when she said that this guy would now be under her protection. Never in his life would Ray have thought that he would find himself in such an awkward situation because of the police. The hero would not have been against such help if Ciel had not immediately taken the weapon from him. The girl fought well, but this did not give her the right to be the first to rush into battle among the guys. Morius always won fights, which is why she so boldly rushed to the very front lines. But Choice did not lag behind the girl, since he could not lose to her in a fight against the bandits. Ciel didn't really like the fact that the guy was partially taking all the glory from her in these battles. She was confident that she could single-handedly deal with all the enemies who were behaving brazenly. The girl's confidence was based, among other things, on the fact that she had been fighting with Ray's club the whole time. Ciel also didn't forget about kicks, which she was especially effective at. So soon, most of the enemy was unable to rise in the near future, but there were still too many of them left, and those guys only got angrier after what happened. If only these guys knew they were going up against one of the best cops in the business. Seeing how easily the girl handled it, Choice finally remembered about his safety. But he was the bandits' target, so they weren't going to let him go home. Red was one of the leaders of this gang, and until now, he had not even entered into a duel. The guy just ordered his assistants to attack, but their efforts were not enough for Ray. So soon, the hero reached the leader, who was hit with several powerful blows at once. The bandits made a grave mistake when they targeted Choice, who was an amazing fighter. They were even more unlucky because the guy had such good help in the form of Ciel. That's how they lost surprisingly quickly, although they had initially expected a different result. The leaders were unable to come up with anything to save the people who had been so badly set up. To ensure that none of the enemies could escape, Choice called for police reinforcements just in time. So soon, all the bandits were caught, despite the fact that they desperately tried to escape. Ciel personally ensured that justice finally prevailed around her. As soon as the hooligans were dealt with, the girl immediately remembered Ray's fine, which was the reason she had come. As in previous times, the hero had no desire to part with the money he had earned with difficulty. But that evening, Morius was so serious that the guy had no other choice. Since it was easier to pay such a persistent girl, Choice still listened to her. No sooner had the young man earned a little than he had to give up everything for the recent beating of Samper. But he still didn't despair because he had the whole night ahead of him to make up for lost time. Choice had no doubt that these bandits were also sent by his red-haired enemy. It was not the first time he had encountered stupid enemies acting in such an unpleasant manner, so he could only hope that Ciel would sort out this strange situation. Since there was no more money left, Choice had no time to talk at all. The larger the sum he earns, the more he will help his father pay for his mother's medicine. If only Ciel had known about Ray's situation right away, she would never have demanded money from him. Of course, Choice wouldn't have accepted such a concession, but he would certainly have been pleased. That was the end of the police's business for the day, as they still had to sort out the bandits' registration. All the way to the site, Ciel couldn't get Ray out of her head, and her heart was becoming more and more fond of him. But the girl did not admit even to herself that she was in love, although the goddess's charms worked. Instead, Morius made a promise to herself that she would definitely help Choice in his situation. So the very next morning, the hero again had to meet with the girl who would not leave him alone. It turned out that the policewoman had been waiting for the guy near the dormitory for a long time together with the headman. Today, the young man didn't plan to get up early, but he couldn't leave the girls completely alone. Ciel didn't just visit Choice for no reason, because she had evidence regarding yesterday's attack. Although Rosalie still distrusted Morius, the policewoman herself didn't care. What was much more important to her was that she had to show up red-handed to Gray, who had organized the attack. Deep down, Ciel was hoping for praise for her quick investigation. But Choice only paid attention to Rosalie. The fact that the guy was communicating more with other girls really upset the policewoman. But Morius understood that she was much older than the boy, so she had no right to lay claim to him. Meanwhile, Samper was in the hospital, but still asked his parents to hire bandits. He hoped that no threat could lead to his family. But somewhere, he had seriously miscalculated. Once the police got on the trail, they quickly arrested all the suspects. Only Gray continues to lie that his family had nothing to do with the attacks on Choice. His mother was particularly vocal in resisting arrest, but this only made her situation worse. But the elder Samper quickly realized that they had somehow miscalculated their plans. So soon the woman threw a real tantrum, trying to clear the honor of her family. But for Gray, it was all over anyway, as the matter quickly became too high profile. Literally a couple of minutes later, the police took his parents away, and the boy was left completely alone. At exactly that moment, the hero entered the room, as he still wanted to receive an apology from Gray. The victory was entirely Choice's, so he didn't mince words in front of Samper. But the red-haired guy's eyes only grew more angry, because he hated losing. For a long time, the hero heartily mocked Gray, who had caused him so much trouble. So the guy didn't notice how this time he too was in serious danger. Ciel had always fought for justice, and now she wouldn't let Choice laugh at the criminal any longer. And so ended the story in which Ray was Rosalie's savior from the hands of the impudent Samper. And the girl remained incredibly grateful to her friend for not being afraid to help her. Choice had another swimming competition tomorrow, so the class leader encouraged him to take a rest. Until now, Ray had been reluctant to participate in the race because many girls were paying attention to him, but he never noticed that Rosalie, too, watched his successes with bated breath every time. Only a few days later did the hero remember that the producer had never contacted him. This made Choice really angry, as he needed money for his mother more and more. He tried several times to contact Mr. Gordon personally, but all this brought no results. So Ray had no choice but to silently curse the lying film producer. Until Gordon needed that very armor, he didn't even remember the existence of Choice's savior. The man could be understood, because he had so much to do that such a trifle flew out of his head. As soon as he realized his mistake, the gentleman immediately rushed to correct it in time. The hero immediately answered the call, as he was waiting for at least some news from the producer. But his anger vanished as soon as the guy heard himself being invited to the shoot. But here too, Problems were not long in coming, because the security guard did not let Choice through. Apparently, no one had time to warn the guard that new faces would soon appear on the site. So Ray spent a lot of time trying to prove to this man that he had a way in. Choice would have stood near security for a long time if his sisters Jasmine and Sarah hadn't personally come for him. For the first time in his life, the guard saw these beautiful girls greet a person on their own. It was a great source of pride. And Ray wasn't shy about showing off how tough he was. The girls hadn't had the opportunity to introduce themselves to the hero before, so they did it now. They took with them Agent May Raleigh, who accompanied the new actors on the set. Sarah was so happy to see Choice that she couldn't help but smile at the smile on her beautiful face. The girl had long wanted to thank the guy for so bravely saving her life in the water. But Jasmine, as usual, drew the men's attention to herself, wanting to chat with Ray too. The girl charmed the guys so amazingly that many were unable to take their eyes off her. From such increased attention from the beauties, Choice's heart was ready to break into small pieces. If it weren't for May's help, the hero would not have been able to free himself from the actress's communication for a long time. But it was time for the girls to go to rehearsal, and Choice needed to stop by to see the producer. It was only when Jasmine and Sarah began practicing that Raleigh was able to return to help the hero. She offered him such a large sum of money as a thank you that Choice couldn't believe his eyes. But he was never able to get this money, as it was soon taken from under his nose. Jasmine considered this amount too low for the one who saved both sisters from death. So in the end, the guy was left without any money at all, even though he really needed it. Time was running out. So soon, Choice was being prepared for his first scene in the famous film. Ray had assistants with him everywhere, as he had never acted in a film before. Although he was given a short amount of time in the film, the young man still wanted to give his best. Everyone around supported the guy in the hope that he would cope with his role. But Choice's problems started from the very beginning, since he didn't know how to play emotions at all. Ray had no idea what he needed to do to get the desired reaction. He tried many facial expressions, but each emotion was completely inappropriate for this moment. As a result, Choice considered himself a real mediocrity, because his task was simple. For the first time in their lives, the assistant saw a person so incompetent that he couldn't cope with anything. It was only when the two actresses returned to the set that hope appeared in people's eyes again. The assistant had finally given up by this point, as he could teach the young hero nothing. The man fell into such a deep depression that he was ready to quit his job right then and there. Initially, Jasmine didn't believe that things were that bad with just one person training, but soon the girls became convinced that Choice had no talent for filming. While the actresses did it easily and naturally, Ray couldn't do anything as well. Soon, the guy himself began to think that he should not play any role in such a famous film. But the young man didn't have time to refuse the role, since the producer had already given the order to begin filming. Only the hero understood that he was about to be greatly disgraced, because he didn't know how to play. But Gordon believed in the guy who could bring even more fame to his project. They only filmed one scene in which Choice had to act like a brave general, but his face again betrayed the guy who had no idea how to act out these emotions. As a result, the same scene was reshot so many times that everyone was completely exhausted. Only after a couple of hours did Mr. Gordon allow a break, as filming had already become impossible. Ray understood how hopeless he was, so he wanted to leave the project himself, just to avoid slowing it down. But the producer couldn't fire the man he personally invited to take part in the filming. They never had a chance to have a proper conversation because there was all this fuss about Choice. Jasmine and Sarah actively defended Ray, while the rest of the cast was against him. With just one word, Gordon stopped the quarrels, since the final decision was still his. That's how Choice stayed on the project, despite the fact that he couldn't even smile nicely on camera. His only hope was for the goddess's help, but he accidentally left the mug with her in the car. The guy was pleased with the attention from the girls, but they wouldn't have helped in this situation. So, at the first opportunity, he ran to the car to ask Lucielle for help. Now her magic was the only thing that could help the hero. But as luck would have it, at that very moment, the girl did not want to answer the prayers of the young hero. No matter how many times he called upon her, Lucielle remained motionless every time. Out of desperation, the hero was forced to resort to extreme measures, which the goddess would certainly not have appreciated. With a sly smile, he aimed straight at the mug, since he had been wanting to go to the toilet for a long time. At that moment, Lucielle enjoyed the warm sun that she herself created in the dimension. As soon as she noticed that Ray was going to damage her shelter, she could not remain silent. As a result, Choice still managed to get an answer from the girl, although she was planning to run away. But when it came to her honor and dignity, Lucille could not stand aside. The hero asked the goddess for so little that it was difficult for him to refuse in such a situation. So Lucille agreed to help, although it meant she had to spend her strength again. Meanwhile, everyone was eagerly awaiting how Choice would change after a short break. The guy promised that no one would recognize his acting once the vacation time was over. He himself was tired of enduring ridicule from actors who firmly considered him untalented. Of course, nothing had changed in Ray's game, but now his consciousness was controlled by a beautiful goddess. Unlike Choice, the girl had a talent for acting, so she handled everything easily. People couldn't believe their eyes when they discovered how much the guy had changed in just a couple of minutes. There was no longer a drop of pretense in it, as the emotions seemed real and captivating. No matter what shot the producer was looking at now, Choice looked brilliant and unsurpassed everywhere. Mr. Gordon could not believe his eyes for a long time, since such a good game was rare. His joy knew no bounds, because he never dreamed of achieving such a good result from Choice. From that moment on, the hero received only compliments on the court, as he deserved. Sarah was the most delighted of all by Ray's achievements, as her feelings for him had finally strengthened. Only one actor disagreed with such praise, as he still considered himself better. But he himself couldn't find a single hint of bad acting when he looked at Choice's footage. At this point, Ray's role in the film was over, so he could let the goddess go with a clear conscience. The girl did a fantastic job with her role, and at the same time, she herself felt joy from the game. Lucille only pretended that she didn't like something, since she was interested in participating in the human world. Only after this did the impudent actor apologize, because he thought too little of the hero. Once Choice's shift was over, he could finally receive his long-awaited fee for filming. That's how the story ended with the actors, some of whom still didn't believe in Ray's success. Since the boy was able to collect the necessary amount for his mother, he hastened to share it with his father. But it turned out that mother's condition only worsened, so the money collected was not enough. Who would have thought that at such a young age, the hero would be forced to look for money for his parents? No matter how difficult his situation was, the young man did not even think of getting upset, because he was healthy. As long as he could earn money as a taxi driver, Choice never thought of complaining or resorting to the goddess's help. But this time, he was unable to work in peace, as two actresses caught up with him. Right now, Ray wasn't ready to join them, as he wanted to devote time to himself. But the little sisters begged him so desperately that anyone in the hero's place would have given up long ago. But Choice had a resistance to female beauty, so he still did not agree to go for a walk. Jasmine insisted on meeting so brazenly that even Sarah felt uncomfortable with her behavior. For the first time in his life, Ray met a girl so brazen that she did not understand and did not accept refusals. In this situation, he had no choice but to escape from the actresses by car. It goes without saying that none of the girls could compete with Choice in driving skills. So all of Jasmine's plans were destroyed by the cruel wall of the young hero's indifference. The girl took the defeat hard, since she had only recently admitted to herself her feelings for the guy. But Choice didn't regret at all that he had fled from the chase, because he had no time for love. But it didn't end there, because Jasmine had a whole bunch of selfishness and arrogance. Ray couldn't even imagine that such a beautiful girl would be good not only in the field of acting, but at that very moment the mugs suddenly began to move, which distracted the hero's attention. The young man immediately guessed that a new test was ready for him, which is why he was drawn into the dimension. But he was not at all happy that the goddess again did not even warn him about this. For some reason, the girl found herself in a very awkward situation, and the guy didn't notice. While on vacation, she found herself buried in the sand and was kicked in the face by Choice. So it was no surprise that after all this, Lucille was not in a good mood. For the first time in his life, the young man saw the beautiful goddess in such a strange position. It turned out that these were extreme measures, because now Lucille didn't even have any clothes. Like a true gentleman, the young man did not disturb the girl so as not to embarrass her even more. The goddess spent all her strength to ensure the hero's safety during the next test. If it weren't for her intervention, the guy could have easily died at the very beginning of the new test. This news did not please Choice, who had no plans to die in another dimension. If only his wishes could come true here, the guy would never have taken part in the trials. But Ray's opinion was of no importance to either the goddess or the mug. So his test began. This time he had to drive a car to the very finish line, and in a pixel world. Choice immediately mistakenly decided that he would pass this test on the first try, since he was constantly driving. So the guy already had a premonition of his victory, since he was one of the best taxi drivers. The hero had to work hard to wait until the time finally came to move forward, and problems overtook him almost immediately, because no one on the road followed the driving rules. Even when the young man didn't die but merely flipped over, it didn't give him any relief on the track. The next huge truck crushed the hero into a pancake, proving that it would not be easy to win. The most terrible thing was that this time the guy felt more pain after each death. It's all because the goddess accidentally made a mistake in her calculations, and therefore added sensitivity to him. As if it wasn't enough for Choice to be going through a difficult test, Luciel wasn't helping him either. However, the young man soon completed one of the first levels, which he himself was incredibly happy about. After each finish, he could improve his skills so that the car would drive better. So he managed to get through a few more levels practically without dying. But he was still far from victory. The more the boy practiced driving, the better his skills became in the process. So after a while, Choice was doing so well in the tests that he stopped stressing. But even this did not save him from accidental deaths, because other players still did not follow the rules. Each time, it became more and more difficult for the young man to improve the car. But he had no intention of giving up the challenge. Ray was burning with the desire to win, so he only pressed the gas and brake harder. And soon, Choice finally completed all the levels and even reached the finish line first. The guy's joy knew no bounds, as he completely lost track of time during this ordeal. But now, no racer in the world could beat a hero who learned a lot in the car. All this time, the young man dreamed only of returning to his world as soon as possible after everything. But instead of returning, he again found himself in the dimension of the goddess who wanted to talk to him. This time, the girl crawled out of the ground, but still did not want to show the guy her body. Luciel's strength was barely enough to maintain even such a weak image as a spirit. Only when she gave the hero some instructions did the guy return back to his world. Now he felt like a fish in water in the car, and no one could catch up with him. After everything that had happened, Choice was not afraid to make sharp turns that others would not have made. So the girls soon realized that they would never be able to keep up with such a great racer. So this time the sisters retreated, because they didn't want to die chasing Ray. But they still followed him, although they significantly slowed down along the route of pursuit. Meanwhile, the hero accidentally encountered the car of one of the opponents who was hired by Gray. It was a great opportunity for him to teach a lesson to the guys who tried to beat him up, so the guy boldly intervened in the training race, which he now planned to win. The opponents noticed Choice's car from afar and were delighted to see their target. Although the track was quite difficult, nothing could stop the hero who was ready for victory. The guy boldly stepped on the gas, because he knew that he would be able to turn around in time at a dangerous moment. But the opponents were not prepared for some madman to drive towards them at full speed. Only at the very last moment did the hero avoid the collision, which greatly frightened everyone around, while Choice himself didn't even flinch, as the whole trip was manageable for him. While his rivals were jumping to the sides, the guy was already rushing forward along the track with all his might. It took his opponents a few more minutes before they were ready to go too. Despite the significant time gap, the guys still rushed to catch up with the impudent Ray. The entire time on the road, Choice calmly maintained his lead and didn't even push it to full speed. But no one could overtake him on the turns, because the guy had improved his skills during the test. Besides the bandits, the hero was also pursued by the sisters, but they too could not catch up with him. Jasmine always thought she was a brilliant driver, but as a result, the girl couldn't even get close. At that moment, Choice seemed to merge with the track. So easily and quickly did he take each turn. As soon as the guy managed to escape his pursuers, he finally got in touch with the two Guan sisters. Choice was genuinely concerned for their safety, as racing was not a place for girls. But even Sarah didn't want to slow down, even though her sister had been driving the car the whole time. Jasmine quickly realized that she would never be able to keep up with the guy, so she began to lure him with watches that Ray could get if he met them. Initially, the guy naively refused the gift, but still became interested in this model. He fell into deep despondency as soon as he realized how much such a small watch of jewelry cost. More than anything in the world, the hero needed money now, so he forgot about his pride. Once the girls leave the track, Choice will be ready to meet them for the watch. So Jasmine carried out a brilliant operation, because she arranged a personal meeting with Ray. The guy himself didn't realize that he had fallen into a trap, since that kind of money meant nothing to the actresses. Both sisters communicated so well with each other that they did not feel any competition, despite being in love. Now Jasmine, too, was making every effort to attract Choice's attention. But Sarah was the first to notice how good this guy was. But she didn't hold it against her sister. Meanwhile, although the sisters had escaped the chase, for the hero, it still continued with other guys. Because of the telephone conversation, the young man did not immediately notice that his opponents had almost caught up with him. He couldn't let his opponents win, so now he had to focus on the race. Now the hero had every chance of a quick victory, but one event prevented him from doing so. One of the cars lost control and fell at full speed into the water right off the cliff. Despite the fact that his enemy was in front of him, the hero boldly ran after the fallen man. Along the way, other guys tried to stop him, not understanding the seriousness of the situation at all. It was only when Choice had scattered everyone around that he was able to get even a little closer to that cliff. The guy sincerely did not understand why people continued to do nothing, even though their friend was drowning. He had very little time to save the man who was stuck in the car. Although Ray could stay underwater for a long time, that guy didn't have such a remarkable skill. Moreover, due to the pressure, he found himself trapped inside the car, which was slowly filling with water. If it weren't for the hero's help, the enemy would have definitely died, since the rescuers wouldn't have had time to help. In this situation, Choice sacrificed his arm just to save the drowning guy. It was only thanks to this that they both rose to the surface despite the critical moment. Ray's skills did not fail him this time either, and the enemy was now completely fine after the fall. His friends quickly took the victim away to provide him with the necessary medical assistance. Choice could only hope that in all the chaos the guys would simply forget about him. Now the hero was in no condition to fight, as he had lost his club in the process. Besides, he had injured his hands so badly that there was no question of any battle now. It was just at that moment that one of the bandits with a menacing face approached the poor hero. Choice barely managed to cover his wounded arm to prevent the enemy from hitting it again. The leader who approached the hero was named Andrew Reeves, and he always responded with gratitude for help. From now on, the guy no longer had any complaints against the man who saved one of their friends. Many opponents still haven't accepted the fact that Choice just turned out to be a hero to them. Even the rescued Barry Lynch found it hard to believe that the one he was chasing had helped him. The last thing the hero expected was that these guys would praise his small feat. He thought that the guys would still be hostile, but their expressions changed dramatically. Barry personally called for help from their nurse, Fiona, who had good medical skills. The girl was able to provide first aid, which was often required by one of the bandits, so she was only too happy to help Choice, who had demonstrated such good qualities. That's how the issue with Ray's hand was quickly resolved, although the guy himself would hardly have been able to bandage it well. But the bandits did not let the hero go, now wanting to learn his amazing skills personally. Before, Choice would never have thought that he would find such a good way to make money. The people who surrounded him were the children of rich parents, and therefore could afford a lot. They all witnessed Ray's amazing writing and wanted to become his students. The hero knew his own worth very well, so he set a high price for just 1 hour of lessons. The guy couldn't even imagine that everyone around him would perceive his reward as some kind of cheap services. Not a single person thought that this cost might be unreasonably high. Only Choice remained in surprise when everyone left for a while to get ready for training. So in the end, Ray didn't regret his injured hand at all, because he got a good way to make money. In this situation, the only thing that upset the hero was that he crashed the car during sudden braking. As soon as he called a tow truck, the car owner immediately found out what had happened. The man was always lenient towards Choice because he paid his rent on time, so the first thing he worried about was the guy's condition, not the broken car. Choice was very lucky to have an owner who turned out to be a very nice person. He even sent the guy a large sum of money so that he could repair all the damage himself. If the man had known about the hero's upcoming earnings, he would hardly have acted in such a way. So far, Choice has been very lucky, and all his money problems have been resolved fairly quickly without his involvement. That night, the guy, as usual, tried to return to the dorm as quietly as possible, but his friends were still awake, as if they hadn't planned to go to bed before Ray arrived at work. As the boy had feared, the boys raised quite a fuss when they saw that he had returned wounded. With great difficulty, the young man managed to calm his classmates, who continued to question him for a long time. The next morning, the hero desperately tried to retire to the dining room so that no one would bother him today. But from the very beginning of the day, the new teacher constantly tried to get through to the student. As a result, Choice was left with no choice but to come to the meeting with Suzanne. The young man immediately anticipated something unpleasant, because teachers never called him to their place just like that. As soon as Logwood saw the boy's bandage, her face changed with alarm and surprise. Ray didn't want to draw attention to himself, so he didn't tell anyone the truth about his nighttime injury. So Suzanne mistakenly decided that Choice was actually lying to her in order to get an alibi. When Ray went to meet his teacher, he didn't think she would want to give him first aid. The boy didn't need the bandage at all, so he began to desperately resist her offer. This resulted in Choice's hands moving down to one intimate place. For the first time in her life, Suzanne found herself in such a delicate situation, and with a student at that. Embarrassment washed over Ray as he realized what he had done by accident. The teacher was so stressed that she was unable to string together even a couple of words. As punishment, the hero mocked himself, just so that Suzanne would forgive him. As a result, the bandages on the hand did come undone, revealing a rather unpleasant picture to the teacher. As soon as the girl realized that the guy wasn't lying to her, she immediately became kinder to him. Logwood didn't usually hurt other people, but now she found herself in such a confusing situation. Embarrassment and shame mixed inside Suzanne. But she still offered her help to the student. Choice was pleased with the attention from such a beautiful girl, even though she was his teacher. At that very moment, Director Chester entered the office, as he had business with Suzanne. Ray had noticed the man's biased attitude for a long time, and it always made him very angry. He had no doubt that because of him, Logwood would have a rather unpleasant conversation. But the boy couldn't help the teacher in any way, and out of despair, he continued to injure his sore arm. All he had to do was wait for Suzanne to return so he could ask her about everything in person. As the guy expected, Logwood's face was practically gone after talking to the nasty director. However, the young man was unable to find out anything from the teacher, who kept the conversation a secret. In fact, Suzanne didn't initially want to scold Choice at all. She wanted to give him a scholarship. But to do this, Ray needed good grades, and he studied too little in the subjects because of his work. In fact, the hero no longer needed money, because he had a good part-time job as an instructor. But the young man did not want to upset the teacher who tried so hard for him just like that. It was only after several attempts that he found out what the director had talked about with Madam, and he became angry again. Choice hadn't noticed before that he was slamming his hand on the table so often, but now it was very noticeable. It turned out that Suzanne was saddled with the international students, and her position depended on their well-being. But the saddest thing for Logwood was that it was Ray who had to represent the university to the students. The teacher had no idea that Choice had actually recently become fluent in English. But the hero immediately rejoiced when he realized that the director had been very wrong in his assumptions. He had lived at sea for so many years, communicating in English, that it was no longer a problem for him. Finally, Choice put the knowledge he had so hard to obtain during the goddess's sea trial to good use. Suzanne herself did not expect that she would open up so much to the student who had recently embarrassed her. Ray immediately noticed that the teacher suddenly began to doubt that he could handle it. And Suzanne had good reasons for this, because she knew all the marks of the young hero. Never before had the girl seen such poor results in absolutely all subjects. All this time, Choice was hoping that none of the teachers were looking at his grades. Naturally, the hero's friends were among the first to learn the news about his performance in front of students. Michael knew his friend's level of English well, so he was seriously scared by this situation. Many students echoed Michael's sad sentiments, as Choice had the worst English. Only the headman stood up for the young man, although she too was not sure that he could cope. All that was left for Ray to do was to personally prove to everyone around him how wrong they were about him. While Principal Chester was already dreaming about expelling the annoying student Choice, he deliberately created a situation after which he could easily expel him from the university, and then no one will interfere with his rapprochement with the beautiful teacher. The hero did not prepare at all for the next morning, since he already knew everything perfectly well. But his friends prepared a special surprise for the guy, which he did not expect to see in the morning. Choice ended up tied up with rope from head to toe because the boys couldn't let him embarrass himself. The guys meant well, but in the end, they only increased their anxiety about the performance. Until the very end, they begged their friend to run away to a place where no one from the university could find him again. At that moment, Ray barely explained to the guys how their plan had failed from the very beginning. As a result, they all came to the performance, where a large number of people had already gathered. The manager personally said a few parting words before the general conversation began. Before the performance, Michael prayed to all the gods at once that Choice would cope with the task. The hero himself understood perfectly well that losing would have meant his quick expulsion due to the director's plan. Until the very end, Mr. Chester believed that Ray would not even dare to go on stage in front of everyone. As soon as the guy appeared on the podium, the crowd froze in anticipation of his words. Choice could feel the weight of responsibility on his skin, which was why he could barely cope with his fear. But he had already given an English speech many times during the sea trial that the goddess had arranged. So this time, the guy simply repeated everything he experienced in another dimension. People couldn't believe their ears, as Choice's English sounded very similar to the native speaker's own language. The directors started this whole story in the hopes of disgracing the guy, but it turned out the opposite. Ray spoke freely in front of a large audience, completely unashamed of another language. Even when one of the foreign teachers spoke to Choice, the hero still did not lose his head. He not only understood the meaning of the question asked, but was also able to answer it correctly for the professor. Friends had no idea that Ray had such a huge number of talents within him. Only Rosalie believed in Choice until the very end. So now she was on cloud 9. The foreign teacher praised Choice's language, which was very similar to his own. This is how the hero cleverly got out of a situation that could have become shameful for him if not for the goddess's test. Chester no longer had any ideas on how to expel the troublesome student from the university. Everyone around praised Ray wholeheartedly, without even suspecting the director of the institute's real plan. So Chester had to agree that Choice was worthy of studying at his institution. As soon as the performance ended, Ray's classmates surrounded him with curiosity. Among everyone, only Rosalie was not against the fact that the guy had prepared such a huge surprise, while the hero's friends demanded an explanation, since they still could not understand anything. Once again, Choice had to lie that he had simply prepared well with Vanessa. Sally didn't appreciate the joke as he was under a lot of stress from Ray's silence. At that time, none of the students knew that the teachers had taken an interest in Choice. Wei supported the noisy Sally, as he also wanted to know more details, as if the hero could tell his friends a truth that they still wouldn't believe. Their loud conversations were interrupted only by the appearance of the teachers, who showed up very suddenly. The director's face showed everything he thought about Choice, who turned out to be so smart. At this moment, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became heavier due to Mr. Chester's mood. Sally and Michael were immediately on guard, ready to fight for their friend Ray. But the hero understood that such behavior would only give the director the opportunity to expel them. So the guy had to take on all the negotiations, since he had the most patience. Chester was still looking for at least one reason to expel Choice from the university, but the other teachers were favorably disposed towards the boy, who represented their university well. Suzanne felt especially proud of Ray, even though she herself had not believed in his powers until recently. So everything was heading towards the fact that Mr. Chester would soon be left without influence at his own university. The man was very upset by the current situation, as he had not planned to quit. None of the teaching staff could understand the depth of their director's experiences. It would have been a sin not to celebrate such a victory. So that same evening, many gathered in the restaurant. This time, Rosalie personally made sure that no one mixed anything into the drinks. But even without this, there was complete chaos at the tables, because the drunk guys had stopped thinking. Suzanne fit in surprisingly well with the group of students, wanting to celebrate with everyone else. But in fact, Logwood had one more wish, and it directly concerned young Choice. The teacher still felt guilty about his hand, so she really wanted to help. But the hero didn't need any bandages at all, since he felt great anyway. At that moment, the guy was lucky, and a random taxi drove right next to him, which helped him escape. So Suzanne was never able to help the student who had so cleverly hidden from her. The girl was very upset. But what could she do if the guy didn't make contact? After everything that happened, Choice didn't want to sleep, so he preferred to take a walk on the shore. His city was famous for its picturesque views, and many tourists came for photographs. As usual, problems found the hero who didn't plan to get involved in anything today. But it was at that moment that he noticed the figure of a dangerous man rushing towards him. It immediately became clear to Ray that this was a criminal who was desperately fleeing from the police. But what surprised the guy most was the presence of CL, who had almost caught up with the unknown bandit. Since the man was resisting, The girl had permission to use force, but the criminal was so clever that Morius alone could not catch him quickly. Who would have thought that this evening the hero would meet this impudent policewoman again? He was very close, so he could clearly see all the actions of the girl who attacked a guy. At some point, the criminal broke free again and ran towards Choice, which was a mistake. Ray didn't even think about letting the bandit pass by, even if he attacked him in return. But the man was so tired during the chase that he only had enough time to make a few threats, as if something like that could frighten Choice, who now knew how to stand up for himself. As a result, the young man was unable to hide from the attentive Ciel, who did not expect to see him there. As soon as the partners caught the bandit, the girl took Choice aside for a talk. She knew how cunning the guy could be, so she didn't believe that he just went out for a walk. As a result, Ray had to lie again to come up with some plausible activity. He was lucky, and Morius didn't press for details as she wanted to give the guy a ride home. This offer greatly pleased Choice, who was not very keen on spending money on a taxi. Along the way, Ciel voiced many concerns about Ray, but none of them interested the boy. He said goodbye so courageously that the girl's heart could not stop beating for a long time. With each meeting, Morius fell more and more in love with Choice, and there was no way she could stop it. This time, the room was finally quiet. But Ray heard some unpleasant conversations. He made his presence known at the moment when his friends were planning to throw acid on him. Although it was an envious joke, Wei was seriously frightened at the sight of the evil Choice. Previously, the hero did not pay attention to his friends, but now it was time to restore order among them. He always tried to remain formidable to his friends if they began to seriously violate the boundaries. As a result, the boys were so scared that they no longer planned to harm their friend. This time, Choice only scared the envious Michael and Wei, as he was very tired that day. Now he wanted to relax before going to bed with a cup of tea to relieve the enormous tension. But suddenly, the goddess's mug began to glow brightly. And for the hero, this could only mean one thing. No matter how much the guy didn't want to, he was instantly drawn into another dimension, where a test lay ahead. This time, Choice couldn't find the goddess for a long time, but he wanted to talk to her. The guy never got used to the strangeness of this girl, who could never meet him normally. If only Ray could turn back time, he would never have taken that mug with him. And now he had to fulfill the wishes of Lucille, who was still too weak. The girl didn't have time to conjure up some clothes for herself, so she urgently teleported the hero away. As a result, the guy found himself in the middle of a huge field of pencils, which surprised him greatly. The scale was so enormous that it seemed as if the young man would spend eternity in this place. The whole point was that now he had to learn how to sharpen pencils so that they wouldn't break. Choice couldn't imagine a more boring task, but he didn't get to choose what he did during the tests. Since it was no longer possible to return, the young man soon had to begin the test. It turned out that here too he had levels, and instead of deaths, only pencils broke. Choice has always had good perseverance, so he had no problem concentrating on the task. At first, the pile of pencils grew too slowly, as Ray made occasional mistakes. Each time, the guy loudly cursed the goddess for coming up with such a stupid test, but his words were never heard. So the hero soon resigned himself to what was happening. He wanted to go home, so he had to pass the test instead of swearing at Lucille. The levels increased slowly, and the number of pencils did not decrease. But the young man did not give up. Once again, too much time passed before the guy finally completed this task. By the end, Choice couldn't even move, although he hadn't been physically tired at all over the months. As soon as he returned to his reality, Ray could not stop thinking about the mug with the goddess. The guy found the girl's confinement conditions strange, but she didn't elaborate. As a result, today he decided to forget about all this, because tomorrow there were hard days ahead. The hero fell asleep and did not notice how in the middle of the night, another column of light burst out of the mug. The whole point was that Lucille finally got more freedom thanks to Choice's trials. The goddess could not help but celebrate this event by briefly appearing in the human world. Although she never regained her strength, she could at least now get more information. Lucille's magic stretched across the room, searching for some useful technique. The girl also noticed the laptops. Although their design was much more difficult for her to use, she was already happy that she had increased her capabilities, and she would figure out the rest along the way. The next morning, the hero was unable to sleep because Vanessa missed him. So, the girl arranged a meeting early in the morning since today was a day off. Since Choice had no plans anyway, he did not refuse the invitation. However, the guy couldn't leave unnoticed on the way, as his friends were already awake. Michael couldn't remember the last time his friend had left so early, and not even for work. So Choice had to confess to his friends that he was going to the computer club with Vanessa. Lyrium played so amazingly that even the guys were talking about her enthusiastically. So it was no surprise that the guys wanted to join their friend while they had the opportunity. It was enough for them to just watch Vanessa play, as they would already learn a lot. Although the girl was only Choice's friend, he didn't chase away the curious guys. As a result, the whole company soon gathered together at the club, planning to have a good time. Since the games took a long time to find servers, Ray had time to demonstrate his new skill. The guy had just recently passed the test, so he was now the best pencil sharpener in the world. But he lived in the wrong century, so he couldn't impress anyone with such a stupid ability. Soon the game began, and Choice had to focus all his attention on winning. As always, he took the mug with the goddess with him. And this time, the girl was not going to sit still. She had learned a lot during the night, and was now planning to test her skills in practice. Lucielle had been interested in the human world since childhood, so she also secretly entered the game. As a result, for the first time in a long time, Vanessa felt disappointment, because she was unable to win. Although Choice passed a special test, he too could not do anything to win. It felt like all the mechanics of the game were broken today, and only one character was winning. For the first time in her life, Lyrium was faced with the fact that she could no longer control her players. But what surprised everyone most was that Choice and Vanessa were losing against an unranked newcomer. In the end, the hero couldn't think of anything better to do than distract himself with something less stressful and nerve-wracking. But Lucille was just getting the hang of it, as she really enjoyed winning with magic. Even Choice didn't realize that their losses today were only due to the goddess's interference in the game. They tried to win for so long that in the evening they ran into a nasty group of thugs. Vanessa was used to ignoring such people, so that none of them would touch her. But today, these guys wanted female companionship. And then they noticed such a beautiful girl. Their way of getting attention was to make empty accusations in order to gain a stupid forgiveness. And Vanessa was always ready to provide enough attention to all the impudent ones. She didn't even need anyone's help to deal with the impudent strangers. In a matter of seconds, the guys lost all desire to meet the girl who seemed beautiful to them. All this time, Choice had no idea how strong his young acquaintance was. Only now did his friends realize that the boy had often been in mortal danger. Vanessa had been trained in self-defense since childhood, so she easily defended herself and others. But once upon a time, a similar blow landed on Choice, and the guy almost ended up in the hospital at that moment. After this incident, the hero's friends no longer wanted to walk happily next to such a strong girl. But Vanessa didn't let Ray go with them, because they still had some studying to do. So soon the young man concentrated on how to make mistakes on the test without being noticed. If the hero immediately shows a good result, then Vanessa will clearly suspect something is wrong. True. Now the girl looked so sad that the guy even wanted to attract her attention. Lyrium took her recent loss in the game much more seriously than she let on to her friends, so she thought about something of her own for a long time, until she accidentally met Choice's gaze. The guy didn't expect that his girlfriend would catch him at the most awkward moment when he was distracted from the test. Vanessa was a strict teacher for her friend and always demanded that he think only about his assignments. If Choice deviated from the established rules, the girl could even punish him. The longer Lyrium pressed on Ray, the more embarrassed the boy became because of his confusion. He would prefer that Vanessa didn't try to get closer to him under the pretext of studying. But the hero was not one of those who would be the first to refuse communication, so they talked to each other a lot. As soon as the guy was distracted from the test again, Vanessa turned on the strict regime again. They were so focused on each other that they didn't notice how their friend was watching them from the side. Chappie still had feelings for Vanessa, and was therefore angry about her getting closer to another guy. The next morning, the hero was finally able to visit his mother, who was not getting any better. She could only smile because her husband constantly lied to her about his good achievements. Choice didn't tell his mother that he was the one earning all the money for her treatment. The woman was already worried about her illness, so the guy didn't bother her anymore. From time to time, the owner of the car came to the hero's aid, empathizing with Choice's situation. And every time Ray was grateful to the man for not remaining indifferent to strangers. Even today, the young man could not live without adventures since he met Ciel in the hospital. The girl was not wearing a police uniform this time, as it was her day off, so the guy didn't immediately recognize in her that impudent Morius, who still hadn't left him alone. Choice was lucky because Ciel had her own business at the hospital, so she couldn't talk to him. Therefore, the girl only wished the guy good luck in the hope that his mother would soon get better. But for some reason, the hero only became more uneasy because Ciel was too kind this time. The young man's premonition did not deceive him, as it turned out that from now on, his mother would have a different doctor. Lucas was forced to leave the hospital as a pleasant promotion flashed before his eyes, so he gave all his patients to other doctors so that no one would be left without treatment. But the most surprising thing was that the boy had already met his mother's new doctor. Until this moment, Dr. Lucas had no idea that his assistant had somehow gotten into trouble, but Choice immediately remembered the drunk girl who threatened him with the police late at night. This also came as an unpleasant surprise to Tally, who valued her reputation greatly. Now, Guan will have to contend with bias from a patient's relative. Of course, the hero couldn't leave this situation like that. But he didn't say anything in front of Lucas either. It was only when they were alone that Tally's first act was to apologize for her recent behavior. But Ray was only willing to forgive her if she handed his mother over to another doctor. In fact, Dr. Tally's life was very sad, because she was not given any patients at all. The girl underwent treatment abroad for a long time, but ended up only performing the duties of a nurse. It was this that led her to the one incident with alcohol that Guan regretted. But at that moment, she would not have gotten home on her own, so she had to call a taxi. And finally, the girl was entrusted with treating people, so she did not want to give up the patient. But the guy was adamant in his decision to change doctors, because he didn't trust this strange girl. Tally could hardly object to him, since she herself was to blame for Choice's bias. As much as Guan wanted to rewind time, she had to put up with the current circumstances. So, indirectly, she released Ray's mother into the care of another doctor, which is what the hero wanted. He didn't talk about how money was no longer a problem, so free healthcare was not needed. That's why Tally couldn't assign a patient to herself, even though she was in a general clinic. So Choice's mother still remained under the care of an older doctor whom the boy trusted. But even this did not save the woman, because soon the young hero did not like the results of her tests. In the end, even Dr. Dreyer couldn't really help with the situation involving Choice's mother. The worst part was that the woman was getting worse and needed donor organs. Moreover, none of his relatives matched the description, so the hero did not know what to do. For the first time in his life, the young man found himself in such a sad situation, because now he had money. But all of Ray's efforts were not enough to help his sick mother even a little. Although not immediately, the young man remembered the existence of a goddess who could help him. It's just that recently, the girl preferred to spend time completely alone. Luciel was so interested in exploring the human world that she was not ready to tear herself away from this activity. But Choice turned out to be so persistent that the girl finally paid attention to him. She had been keeping track of all the changes in Ray's life, so she already knew about his mother's problem. So the guy quickly received the good news that the goddess could help him. But everything was not so simple, since the girl was not able to cope on her own. But for the sake of his mother, the guy was ready to do anything. So he was not afraid of the possible challenges. It turned out that the method consisted of the young man having to complete a quest in another dimension. Only the magic bell could fulfill any wish if it came from a pure heart. Lucille rarely used this method, but she couldn't refuse Choice after his repeated requests. This is how the boy moved into a magical world, which was one of the dimensions in the circle. His landscapes were enticingly picturesque, but one should not be deceived by this peaceful beauty. It was not without reason that the goddess emphasized that this world was far from being so simple and peaceful. Choice immediately noticed that the atmosphere around him did not remind him of anything good or pleasant. But all this didn't make the guy change his mind for even a second, because he needed to save his mother. The goddess wasn't sure that in Ray's place she would have acted in such a desperate manner, but the guy looked as if no one would ever be able to talk him out of this idea. Therefore, the girl did not ask any more questions because it was useless. Instead, she teleported Choice to the very center of the dimension, where he would be near the bell. The goddess's portal worked even too accurately, as the hero crashed into that very magical object. But he didn't have time to rejoice at the fact that he was so close to the object he needed. In this world, there were a huge number of creatures that carefully guarded the magic bell, and now they all stared menacingly at the guy who accidentally ended up in their territory. As soon as Choice's energy moved with the bell, the goddess immediately took it back. It was enough for the girl that the guy was filled with the aura of that place in order to cast a spell. It took a lot of effort for Lucille to make the magic go smoothly, but as a result, magic enveloped the hero, who had been keeping his wish in his head all this time. The bell responded to the call, spilling its magical charms across several dimensions at once. The goddess rarely succeeded in such complex spells, and each time she was incredibly happy with the result. Finally, Choice could sincerely thank the girl for the fact that fate had once brought them together. After such helpful assistance, Ray was ready to continue participating in Lucille's challenging trials. The very next morning, he showed up at the hospital in a good mood, despite his mother's condition. And soon, Dr. Tali called Choice for a private conversation, as she had news. The boy's intuition told him that he was about to hear something good about his mother's illness. And indeed, the girl happily announced that a donor had been found for her organ transplant. Ray would never have thought that something like this could move him to tears. Guan put a lot of effort into achieving this, despite the help of the goddess. From that moment on, the young man no longer held a grudge against the girl because she liked to drink. But things couldn't end so easily for the boy who told his father almost nothing. Choice did not confess to him about his earnings, which is why he suffered greatly due to the man's suspicions. The elder Ray still had a lot of pride, so he constantly thought about selling the house. But the hero could not allow his parents to be left homeless, because he was able to find money. Besides his own earnings, he also had good friends who were always willing to help. True, right now the two rich and beautiful sisters were abroad. The girls hadn't heard anything about Choice for a long time, and had begun to miss him a lot during that time. So, as soon as he called Jasmine, the actress immediately picked up the phone. The girl was glad to hear any question from Ray, since no one had ever saved her life so bravely. The hero remembered that the actresses had a lucrative financial offer for him, so he called. Jasmine was not against meeting, but first she and her sister needed to return to the country. That's what they agreed on, and the young man felt a little calmer in his soul from such support. Partly he was worried that the girls would say a few hurtful words to him. Of course, the young man did not intend to rely only on his sisters, but such support was pleasant. As a result, Choice was in a good mood all day long, because life was getting better. Only his friends couldn't understand such emotions from Ray, who was usually always calm. Out of habit, they even walked around each other so that no one would look at them askance. As a result, Choice's abnormal joy led him to unpleasant consequences that day. The guy flew into the river with all his might because he didn't notice the banana plant on the road. But only recently, the young man bought himself a new phone, and now it is irrevocably dead. If only the hero's friends had acted a little faster, he could still have been helped. As a result, when Barry Lynch tried to contact Choice today, he was unsuccessful. This is because Ray's first move was to look for a new phone rather than restore the old one. The hero was sad to realize that there was a whole crowd of people standing on the shore at that moment. As he thought, there was someone in the comments who laughed loudly at his clumsiness. The guy's face seemed familiar to Choice, as they had competed together before. So now Ray was burning with the desire to take revenge on John Miles for all the humiliation he had suffered on the internet. The only problem was that the guy couldn't find the swimmer for a long time until he showed up himself. Moreover, he did it in such a way that it only made the already angry Choice even more angry. John was still deeply upset by the loss in the competition, as he had always been the best. His parents had a lot of money, so the boy felt like he was almost the king of the world. But all this didn't matter to the hero, who always preferred justice. So Miles was very wrong when he thought Choice wouldn't bother him because of his expensive car. Ray had no shortage of courage, because anger drove him to deal with this impudent man. Like all cowards, John did not come to the place alone, as he was afraid of ruining his handsome face. He realized that his ridicule had angered Choice greatly, which is why he called his friends for help. But Ray was now without the company of his neighbors, so he was in a noticeable minority. The recent incident with falling into the river showed the hero that John will never leave him alone. So the guy had no choice but to really scare the arrogant swimmer. Miles didn't even think about resisting, since he didn't have the strength to resist Ray anyway. His only weapon was always ridicule, which is why the guy turned out to be so weak in battle. Choice didn't hit the swimmer too hard, as he only wanted to give him a good scare during the beating. So it was enough for him that John started bleeding, because the guy didn't need more. In such a situation, Miles could only beg for help from his friends, who, for some reason, remained on the sidelines. But just one look from Choice made it clear to them that the boys had better not interfere in this fight. The hero acted as if the gods themselves were on his side and no one could defeat him. This self-confidence told Michael's assistants that they had better not get too close to Ray. It is unknown how this whole situation would have ended if Barry had not suddenly arrived at the dorm. The guy couldn't get through to Choice, so he decided to find him personally in the middle of the day. John knew this guy well, so he was sure that he had come to his aid. No matter who came to this place, Ray was ready to fight with his fists with everyone. But Lynch had no intention of attacking the hero, as he regarded him as a sacred driving teacher. So Choice quickly realized that Barry was on his side this time, not John's. Moreover, Fiona came to see Ray along with Lynch, but she also couldn't get through. The last thing Miles expected was such a setup from the guys who were also the children of rich parents. Barry immediately realized what a bad situation his driving teacher was in, so the guy personally intervened in the fight, leaving John with no chance of winning. Lynch has always found ways to punish people who oppose his friends. His gang arrived just in time to help Barry fulfill all his wishes. The boys didn't hesitate in their actions, because their parents would still be able to compensate for the damage. Even Choice wouldn't have treated John as cruelly as the assistants who were on Lynch's side. Barry knew no other fighting methods except pressure, which always worked well on his opponents. Finally, he left John his card so that the boy could complain to his parents. Fiona did the same, as they both had no fear of any consequences for their actions. As soon as Michael saw the names on the cards, he changed his mind about saying anything in response. His father was not even close to the parents of these guys who occupied high positions in society. This is how the problematic situation with John was quickly resolved for the hero, which he was glad about. Barry didn't just come for Choice, because he missed that kind of first-class driving. Only now did the hero remember that he had indeed been unavailable for the last few hours. While the duties did not go away from him, the young man had to bear responsibility. Until now, Choice had only been worried about how no one would find out about his fall into the water, so he completely forgot about Barry and his friends, who were madly eager to learn to drive. That's why the boys took matters into their own hands and brought Ray to the rink that was intended for skating. Choice wasn't opposed to making some extra money so quickly, but he didn't expect to be so popular. But the guy didn't even have a clue how exactly to teach others his driving skills. As a result, the hero had no choice but to pretend to be an important person. He gave each student just one run with him in the hope that the boys would at least remember something. In such a short time, the young man simply did not have time to come up with another plan that would be more reliable. Although he was a master driver, he had absolutely no idea how to operate the gang's expensive cars. For Barry, who drove expensive cars every day, this task was a piece of cake. While Choice didn't immediately figure out how exactly to start the car in order to quickly rush forward, but once the guy figured out how to control it, nothing else could interfere with his driving. In a matter of seconds, he drove the entire route with such dexterity, it was as if he had been born in the car. The hero himself did not expect that he would master extreme driving on a fast track so quickly, but Barry will need a lot more lessons since he didn't remember anything after just one performance. However, Choice was only concerned with making money, not how well he taught driving. Essentially, guys were paying money to take a quick ride in a car with an amazing driver, but none of them even thought of complaining, because the guys treated Choice too well. Everyone tried hard to remember something while riding, but it was practically impossible. No one was willing to admit their inattention, so Ray received only thanks. So, almost until the evening, the hero drove the guys around, who were desperately trying to remember at least something. And finally, only Fiona remained, who had deliberately stood last in line. But now the girl had several hours at once that she could spend alone with Choice. None of the guys expected that they would be deceived by their cunning and beautiful ally. After such a busy day, Ray returned to his friends only in the evening, and they again did not sleep. When the boys were doing something interesting for themselves, they didn't notice the passage of time at all. And this time, they were again observing a case that they did not want to show to Choice. But the hero knew his friends so well that the first thing he did was head to their computers. The guy didn't expect to see Barry's friends on the screen actively destroying John's car. In fact, Choice expected something like this because he had too many ill-wishers. So the guy was glad that at least his roommates were still close friends. But the surprises for Ray didn't end there, because the boys heard the teacher looking for him. The hero was so tired that day that he didn't want any more meetings. But he had no choice. So soon he did meet Suzanne, who began to irritate him more and more. As he thought, The teacher was in the mood for a serious conversation with him, despite the time. The guy didn't have time to mentally prepare himself for the fact that he would have to repel Logwood's attacks. Suzanne was very upset with the student for constantly making her worry. Her emotions were unfair to Choice, since they had almost nothing in common. It turned out that the girl saw the video of the fight, and that's why she ran to Ray so late. Luckily, the guy quickly found the right words to calm the anxious Suzanne. He himself did not notice how he became a reliable support for the teacher, who was older than him. Everything would have been fine if Logwood hadn't worn high heels today, which kept breaking. And this time the girl again lost her balance, but the young man saved her from falling in time. But there was no one to save Choice from the charms of the girl, who had always been very beautiful. Any guy would have blushed with embarrassment at such a collision, and Ray was no exception. As if that incident weren't bad enough, Choice and Suzanne suddenly became targets. The hostel was located near a wild forest inhabited by a large number of snakes. The hero noticed the danger in time, so he saved Logwood from attack, although the snake was not dangerous. This animal rarely attacked people, so the guy was confident that everything was under control. As luck would have it, this particular snake turned out to be hungry, and Choice looked appetizing to it. So soon the two small teeth reached their target, since Ray was afraid to dodge. Horror gripped Suzanne as she witnessed one of her favorite students accidentally suffer. But for Ray, this wound meant nothing at all, since the snake was not poisonous. But the boy forgot to warn the teacher about this, in whose eyes he could soon die. Logwood feared this outcome more than anything else, so she acted quickly. While the young man was throwing the snake back into the bushes, the girl latched onto his wounded fingers. Suzanne had completed all the necessary survival courses, so she knew how to suck out venom well. If only the girl had known that there was no need for this, she would have behaved differently. As a result, she was deeply embarrassed in front of a student whose life was not in danger. This is how the strange meeting between Suzanne and Choice ended, after which the hero was able to rest. But his peace did not last long, because the next morning the director came again to expel him. Ray proudly rebuffed all of Chester's accusations, which increasingly began to pick on him over trivial matters. But this time the director was more serious than ever, because he had seen videos of the fight. Choice had no response, as he had indeed been under constant attack lately. If it weren't for the support of the headman, the boy would have gotten into a violent altercation with Mr. Chester. But not everyone in the class was on the hero's side, as he had many opponents at the university as well. However, Rosalie fought so desperately for Choice that few could argue with her. The classmate deliberately provoked everyone to emotions, because this would harm Ray. The hero's friends could not remain silent in such a situation, and this is exactly what the impudent enemy wanted. But Choice understood how dangerous it was for them to now openly confront all enemies. The enemy had the upper hand as he had collected a lot of evidence against Ray. That is why the director was so happy about his victory, although nothing had been decided yet. In the confusion, it was unclear whether the words of any of Choice's friends would be taken into account. Rosalie was more worried about Ray than anyone else, because it was her rescue that ruined the guy's reputation. Fortunately, there were teachers among them who were willing to give the hero good advice during the struggle.